The K5 is loaded and ready for its close-up. LT and Jeremy sought out to revive a classic Blazer with two goals in mind: show quality looks and performance to match. The proof's in the air and in the mud.
You're watching Power Nation.
Hey guys, welcome to Truck Tech. You know, every so often it's nice to get out of the shop and have a little fun outdoors. And today we'll be beginning a project that will allow us to do more of that once we're finished.
But before we tear into our '89 Chevy K5 Blazer, we thought we'd remind ourselves just how capable these full-size GM trucks were back in the day. So, we'll get it off the trailer and hit the woods.
Man, a lot of trails out here.
This thing really probably needs some different gears in it when we get into the axle portion.
Woohoo! Lay in it, go! Hey man, that did pretty good.
Hold on.
Spin it around. There you go. Yeah. All right, eat, baby.
Hold on.
Come on, truck. There it goes. Yeah. The 5.7-liter TBI 350 hasn't been touched since it left Flint, Michigan 28 years ago. Come on, truck. The solid axles front and rear are adequate for the power levels it puts out, and the short wheelbase can really get you in some tight trails with ease.
I'll let Jeremy take over for a run down the mountain to one of the more technical trails. This one is actually called entrance exam, which means if you can't get your truck up these rocks, hard right. You might as well go, go, go. Call it a day. Just keep coming up and pass your side a little bit. See if we can squeeze in between these two trees. Go high, no. Where are you going?
It's not where I'm going, it's where the mud's taking me.
Just nail it.
As I whipped around to try a harder part of the same hill, I leaned into a tree and it took a little body damage. You can guess who's fixing this.
Whoa! Now surely you can see that tree, right? Yes, sir!
I know I heard a crunch, so we know we've got this.
Yeah.
Oh man, look at the hood gap.
You push the front end over a little bit, bumpers tweak, hit the fender.
So the bumper went into the fender and we caved the door in. You know what? That doesn't bother me that bad because we had a lot of fun today, and for this to be a stock truck like it is and handle everything we threw at it, because this is not a trail rig, so for it to take that hill, that's impressive. So you know what? That doesn't bother me that bad.
You know, you say rock crawling, there wasn't any crawling about that.
No.
That was just to the floor bouncing.
After having some fun out on the trail, make LT do the nasty work.
All right, Mama's fired up.
We'll assess the damage and clean up our '89 Blazer before we start to tear her down.
You know, you're the painter. You should be doing this.
Now, what Bubba says is, don't pressure wash no paint, because it's not good for you.
Just the price of having a little bit of fun is all. Not a big deal. Just a little water, a little mud.
I look fine.
We had a blast with our K5 and only suffered a little bit of minor body damage. We got it back in the shop and all cleaned up. Now, one of the main points behind our wheeling expedition was to find any weak links with this K5.
And what we found is we definitely need more power, more gearing, obviously a bigger lift, and more aggressive tires will certainly help. And of course, a winning paint job. And we're going to do all this without cutting our K5 up.
That's right. We know you guys would just crucify us if we ended up chopping the fenders on a rig as nice as this. So we're basically going to treat it to a full-blown restoration with a couple of custom touches along the way.
That's right. And by the end of the day, we'll have our classy K5 tore down.
To the toolbox.
I'll wait here on you. We'll start up front and work our way back. And and by the end of the day, have separated the body from the frame.
The square body is one of today's most popular GM trucks to build. Introduced with the 1973 model year, it's the third generation of the C and K series trucks, following the 60 to 66 and 67 to 72. Square bodies saw several revisions during their run from the factory. Over the years, you could get many different engine and transmission combinations, ranging from the entry-level 250 cubic inch straight six to the big block 454 and even a 6.2-liter diesel. 1987 was a special year because it was the last year of the square body pickup for C and K10s, but the first year GM offered fuel injection in a half-ton pickup, making 87s a one-year only truck.
There's a couple of ways you can keep up with the hardware when disassembling a vehicle. Since we plan to reuse this fender, I'm going to go ahead and run all of the bolts back in. So that way I'll be able to keep up with them, and when we send this thing off to the blaster, our bolts will get cleaned up and we won't spend an hour on the wire wheel.
Now this fender, on the other hand, we're not going to reuse. It's got some body damage and they're inexpensive enough to replace. So rather than going and screwing a bunch of bolts into this fender and having it stored around the shop for 7 or 8 months while we wait to reassemble the truck, I like to take a plastic bag and clearly label it with the name of the project, location of the bolts, and a description. Now it might seem simple, but it'll save you so much time when it comes to reassembling a project because you don't have to go pawing through a bucket of bolts trying to figure out what went where. So let's face it, there's a lot of hardware on a truck like this.
The driver's side front fender is in great shape, so it'll get reused. Now the passenger side, since I had a momentary lapse of my spotter on the trail, we'll call LMC Truck to get a replacement.
Throw that one in the scrap, it's rusty.
A little more Chevy Blazer history. In 1988, half-ton trucks were updated to the GMT 400 platform. But the square body lived on with the K5 Blazer and Jimmy, Suburban, and one-ton pickup trucks, which finally got killed off in 1991, ending an 18-year run for one of the most iconic trucks in Chevrolet's history. There are plans to bring the Blazer back in 2018 as a crossover between the Equinox and the Traverse. We shall see.
Simple as that. So did you see that tree, or did you just kind of aim for it?
My spotter was supposed to see that tree.
We've got big plans for this truck, but because it's in such good shape, we'll be reusing a lot of what we take off.
Take one of these out, it takes about everything I have not to throw it across the shop. Golly. When tearing down a vehicle, how do you know what parts you want to order new or what you want to restore? Well, what I like to do is make a list. I'll write down everything I pull off the vehicle of what we want to try to get and what we think we can restore. Like this door handle, for instance. It's pitted up. We could take the time to tear it down, send it to the chrome shop, and probably cost anywhere from $100 to a couple of $100 to re-chrome them. We can buy one for a fraction of that. Like this door latch, we can clean that up and reuse it. Same with the locks and the regulator. So this will let you know up front how much money you're going to spend in parts on a restoration, and not only that, what parts are available, because some parts you may have to restore. Just something to keep in mind. Everything we're doing today is typical of a frame-off restoration. And once we get the cab back from the media blaster, it will be in bare metal. Taking your time in the teardown stage will make reassembly go way smoother. That includes bagging and tagging all of the fasteners and carefully storing all of the bigger stuff.
Now this is the moment that car guys everywhere fear during a restoration, especially on a vehicle with a removable top that tends to leak like on this K5. Now as we peel back the carpet, I see a little bit of rust, and this insulation here is damp. It just holds the moisture, but this is actually pretty solid. For the most part, it's just surface rust, but we have a feeling we'll find a lot more as the project progresses. Do we need to be wearing those hazmat suits?
Probably.
Wait till you see what's back here.
Yeah, we've got a little bit of rust going on here, but that's no surprise. We saw that when we picked the truck up. But as notorious as these K5s are for rusting out, I'd say we're in pretty good shape. Oh, I found some more, LT. Woohoo! How you gonna steer the truck?
Flintstone style, baby.
The last thing you want to do is throw these parts in the dumpster, because I promise you through the rebuild of a truck, you'll need to reference these parts. Now, even though we're going to replace most of this with new stuff, there are parts we can freshen up and reuse, like this hood hinge. We'll throw it in the blaster, fresh coat of paint, and save a little dough.
Windshields in modern vehicles are actually held to the body with a urethane adhesive, but in this style of pickup truck, it's actually held in just by a rubber gasket and a locking strip. Now, we're actually going to try to get this glass out without breaking it. I put the odds at about 50-50. The gasket's nice and soft, so I think we'll do all right. Trick is just want to put slow, steady pressure as you work the rubber back and forth. Once we get these top corners out, we're golden. This laminated stuff, you can put quite a bit of pressure on it. Ah, there it is.
Got it? Yep. Cool. That's why you want to pull out a windshield when you paint a vehicle, because if you paint it while it's in, you tape up to it, you can see that paint edge there, and where it's already chipping, that'll eventually chip away and have to repaint it.
Back up a little bit.
You know, LT, this frame looks really good. I bet the most abuse it's ever taken is what we gave it. But
yeah.
I don't see any signs of any kinks, no cracks anywhere, and it's even still wearing some of its original paint. It looks really good.
Yeah, this frame is definitely a good, strong foundation for what we're about to start. And you know, even though you hit the tree up front, the frame looks straight. So I think we're good there. So what did we learn when we're off-road? We definitely need to do some upgrades to this drivetrain.
That's right. What are you thinking?
You know, axles, we definitely need better gears and stronger parts. So probably like a 14 bolt up back, Dana 60 up front, and we definitely need more power too.
Yeah, I don't know about you, but I'm thinking a big block. What do you
Definitely big blocks are nice. Maybe a 4L80 trans, like a 208 transfer case, crossover steering. You know, basically just make everything bigger, stronger, and tougher.
think? If we'd have had that on the trail, we may have done a little better.
I think you're right.
Let's get this thing out of here.
Oh yeah, bigger tires too.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe some 44s.
44s.
Maybe not that big.
The cab is in really good shape too. The front floor pans are really solid. What's surprising is there's no rust in the inner rocker.
You know, normally these trucks are just chewed up. The rockers are gone, and this one is super clean.
Bed floor looks really good. We had a couple of spots right there that it wasn't a surprise. A couple patch panels take care of that.
You know, we did something a little bit different on this project than we typically do. We spent about $6,500 on this Blazer. And yeah, that's a little bit of money to spend, but it pays dividends in the long run, because the $1,000 and $2,000 trucks that you start with, they're just completely trashed and rusted out. So it takes so much more time and effort to make them into a nice truck rather than just starting with something that's already clean.
Yeah, and the next time you guys see this truck, we'll get it back from the blaster. We'll do a little bit of rust repair, give this thing a nice coating, and it should be brand new under here.
I get to paint this one, right?
Yeah, maybe.
All right.
Go get a haircut first.
The square body Chevy is one of America's most popular styles of truck to build right at the moment. And we're going to put our custom touch on this one. When it's done, it's going to have a killer stance, a powerful engine, and best of all, show-winning paint.
That's right. We want to build something that stands out in the crowd. And if you remember the last time you saw this thing, we took it out, did a little wheeling, and we had a blast. But then we brought it back to the shop and tore it completely down. That gave us a really good idea for what we needed to restore and what we could replace.
Because of the high level of quality that we're after on this Blazer, there was really no other option for us than stripping it down to bare metal and starting from square one.
So we headed over to see our friends at Blast from the Past in Lebanon, Tennessee. Because when we need something done yesterday, owner Vance Gregory always comes through for us.
Here at Blast from the Past, we do a little bit of everything. Chassis, car bodies, lawn furniture, anything we can get our hands on. Smokers. We're using a fine crushed glass. It cleans very well. Yeah, it'll probably take, on all of it, the parts plus the shell, you're probably looking at 6 to 8 hours, maybe a little more depending on how much material's on the body panels.
All right, something to remember with freshly blasted steel is don't touch it with your bare hands. Throw on a pair of gloves, because if you touch it with bare skin, it's pretty much gonna instantly rust. Now, since we've gotten this thing back and had a chance to look it over, it's actually in really good shape. There's nothing really any worse than what we thought. We've got a few stress cracks in the floor that we'll have to take care of, and obviously some rust, and there's a little more in the back, but it's not that bad. Now, if you'll remember last season with the F100, I showed you how to properly prepare steel for bodywork. Since we're not going to hop right in on the filler work on this one, I'm going to do something a little different. I'm going to apply a couple of coats of epoxy primer. It's going to give us some really good adhesion capabilities, and it's going to keep all this protected. Let's get it over in the booth. All right, the sealer we're going to be laying down on our K5 is DP50. Now, they recommend that you spray it at 8 to 10 pounds of pressure at the air cap, but how do you know how much pressure you have right here? It's easy to read at the inlet because we normally have a gauge there, but here's a pretty cool way you can do it. This is an air cap test kit that I picked up from Summit Racing. Basically, it has an air cap with a tube that measures pressure, runs it out to a gauge for us. So, at 8 pounds, that puts us at about 18 PSI at the inlet. So every time I unhook, I'll know to set this back at 18 pounds, and we'll be at 8 at the air cap. Epoxy is a very important step, especially on a restoration like this where you know there is potential it will sit in bare metal for a while. I'm laying down 2 coats, and we'll let that cure overnight. All right, we showed you the cancer inside the truck, but as far as the outside goes, there's not really that much rust. We just have a little bit right here in the bedside. Hopefully, when we cut this out, the inner structure will be in good shape, but you know how that goes. Now, we could order a bedside and cut a section out of it, but since this is so small, I'm just gonna show you how to make it. There's 13/16 and about 3/4. Cut it a little large. I'm starting by pulling a measurement of 1 3/4 inches by 6 inches on a new piece of metal. Then cutting the piece out with my electric metal shears. Next up is to make a mark where I need to bend the metal. Over at the brake, I'll bend it to the shape I need. The shrinker stretcher is a handy shop tool that uses jaws for metal manipulation. All right, the piece will start to take shape really quick, so just light presses with the pedal. Get us in the right track. And you can see in just a matter of seconds, we have the exact shape we need. Next, I'll use the new piece as a template to mark what needs to be cut out. Once all the area is free of the rusted metal, I'll apply a nice coat of weld-through primer. Now that I'm happy with the fitment, I can clamp it in place and burn it in. All right, it's looking really good. Got a little bit of metal finishing left to do, kind of shape this body line a little better, but all in all, it's looking really good, and it only took about 45 minutes to do, so just goes to show if you got the right metal tools, you can build just about anything.
Now, last time you guys saw our K5 Blazer, we just got the body back from the sandblaster, and we put it in some epoxy coating to help protect that bare metal.
But we haven't done anything to the chassis yet. It's still assembled with the old engine, trans, and axles. So today we're gonna strip all of this stuff out of here, get down to a bare frame.
Yes, sir.
The work begins by cutting off the old exhaust at the header and behind the muffler, and tossing aside the old junk. Next up, we'll remove the transfer case, making sure to catch the fluid in a drain pan.
Out back, the fuel tank can be lowered from the frame and dragged to our growing pile of parts. Next, the vapor, fuel, and brake lines are removed from the frame as one group.
We'll attach the engine and trans to our hoist and remove them from the frame. These won't be reused, but we'll need some brackets and small pieces, so we won't send it off to the junkyard just yet.
The rear bumper is next on the list of things to go away.
Save that tag.
We'll jack up the rear of the frame and slip some stands underneath.
Then attack the leaf springs next. The sleeves tend to rust out in the middle of the bushings, so we're gonna have to get creative. First, we'll try to chip away the bolt and sleeve inside the hanger using a cutoff disc. This will get me close, but the wheel isn't big enough to reach all the way through. By turning the sleeve, we can reach more of it. But it's still not enough. So I'll bring in the big gun, the air hammer. Using a thin chisel, I can shear the bolt off inside the hanger. You done with that thing yet? I need it. Working on it.
On the other side, we're attempting to use a reciprocating saw to cut through the sleeve, but it's slow progress. Once the air hammer has sheared off the bolt, we'll try to pry the spring free using the mother of all pry bars.
Watch these skills when I come off of here. Man, what did you get? And you're the one that got hurt, and he got hurt. You're playing it off well.
I might have bumped my kneecap. As you can see, this side is being stubborn, but eventually, with some determination, we declared victory over the rust.
There we go.
Bad leaf spring.
All right, I'm gonna go take a break now.
And with a final bolt pushed out, we can roll the junky 10 bolt away from the Blazer for good.
Out front, we remove the upper shock mounts and disconnect the steering gear from the frame.
Woo, that's a cracked frame.
Next is the sway bar frame mounts, followed by the shackles. They slide out nicely with a few gentle taps of a hammer. With the front of the springs disconnected, we can roll the axle out from underneath the chassis. It's four-wheel drive, man.
Push, there you go.
Yeah, climb anything. Overall, teardown went pretty smooth, and now we have a big pile of parts to sort through. Now, we'll be reusing some of these, but replacing most. Now, there's two damaged areas that we'll have to take care of. One is this rear driver body mount that has a rust hole in it, and another one is a very common problem on this era of four-wheel drive trucks, a crack in the frame right where the steering box mounts. You can see it starts at the bottom and runs all the way up near the top, and it's one of the worst ones I've ever seen. As the wheels and tires move with the steering, it puts stress on the front of the frame and eventually starts to crack. Now, this is a safety hazard, so we're going to go ahead and get it taken care of.
We have our K5 frame completely stripped down, and we've shown you a couple problem areas that we need to address. And we're going to start by stitching the frame back together where the steering box mounts. To help us out with that, we have some new equipment in the shop. This is our Miller Dynasty 280DX. It's a powerful TIG welder that's rated at up to 280 amps of power. That means it'll weld 3/8-inch thick steel or aluminum. Now, you can actually run this in a stick configuration, but for us, we're mostly going to be using it in AC TIG or DC TIG modes for aluminum and steel. One of my favorite parts is this actually has a liquid-cooled torch. There's a reservoir underneath the welder, and coolant is actually pumped up through the hoses into the head of the torch. All the excess heat is carried away. Now, this means when we're welding super thick material, we can run more power for longer amounts of time, and the torch won't melt in your hand. That definitely could get a little bit painful. Now, for a type of repair like this, we actually could use a MIG welder or even a stick welder, which is what it looks like they used on their last attempt. Now, the reason we like to use a TIG welder is because it gives you a cleaner, more precise arc. You only have to add filler material when you want it, and it gives you a much cleaner looking weld when you're all said and done. Now, like any good welding repair, we need to start by cleaning up the surface. Clean metal is super important for a strong weld. Because the inside of the crack has some rust and grease, I'll take a thin cut-off disc and make a small groove along the crack and clean it up, and make a V for the weld to fill. One last pass with a flap wheel, and this baby is ready to weld. I'll power up the TIG and switch it to DC mode. I'm using the pulse feature to limit the overall heat input into the frame, while still being able to get good penetration. The Dynasty 280 has a Pro Set feature that helps take some of the guesswork out of TIG welding. It's configured to pulse 100 times per second and only spend 40% of the time at peak power. It's pretty simple to use a TIG. Just keep the electrode close to the surface, start the arc, and heat up the base material until it starts to melt. Then, slowly add filler. There are many methods, but I am dabbing the filler in. You should always try to keep the tip of the filler rod inside the ceramic cup of the welder so it stays in the argon shielding gas to prevent oxidation. With a TIG welder, the power is controlled with a foot pedal, just like the accelerator on a car. When coming to an edge or a hole, less power is needed to prevent burning through. So I'll simply lift off the pedal a bit until I'm back in the middle of the material or done with the bead. Well, we have the frame all welded up and it's just as strong as it was on the day that it left the factory. But obviously it's not strong enough because the crack happened in the first place. So how are we actually going to reinforce this frame rather than just repair the damage? Well, we went to Summit Racing and picked up this frame repair kit that fits 67 to 91 four-wheel drive Blazers, Suburbans, and pickup trucks. It's just a stamped piece of steel that slides over the frame. We weld it into place and it'll provide enough reinforcement that this problem is never going to happen again. I'll hold up the plate and roughly mark the outside of the frame so I know where the edges will be. Then, a grinder with a 40 grit flap wheel is used to remove all the paint from the repair area. I'll also flatten the new welds so the plate can sit flat against the frame. I'll again mark the edges of the plate and the holes in the center, then mask over those areas. By using some Duplicolor weld-through primer, the inside of the repair can be protected from rust. With the paint dry, I'll bolt the plate onto the frame and tighten it until it makes contact. A C-clamp helps press the plate to the frame, and I can begin welding the holes in the center and work my way out. It's a simple process of clamp, hammer, weld, and repeat. Now, this is a bit of a tedious job. I'm not gonna lie, it does take some time. It's not hard work, just time consuming. You gotta make sure this plate fits perfectly on the frame so there's no gaps when you go to weld it up. But if your frame is cracked, there's really no other option. Now, this kit also comes with another plate that mounts up underneath the frame and ties into the cross member, providing even more strength. Now, as for me, I've got some more hammering and welding to do. Since Jeremy is back at the shop catching up on some paint stuff, I grabbed Pat from Engine Power and we hit the road to look for a rear axle for our Blazer.
Let's do this.
We plan on adding some big block power and big old tires to our K5 Blazer, so we need to ditch that wimpy 10-bolt rear axle in favor of something just a little bit stronger.
We are at Express Pull and Save in Laverne, Tennessee. Now, this is a self-service yard with a whole lot of inventory, so we shouldn't have any problem finding an axle that will work in the Blazer. It really doesn't matter what this axle comes out of, Dodge, Chevy, Ford, and we have some great options in this area, like this Dodge, and this rig, what looks to be an old Ford. Now, both of them have Dana 60 rear ends. Now, the Dana 60 is a great axle. It has a slightly larger 9 3/4 inch ring gear, and it is a full floater design, which makes it ideal for heavy duty applications like towing or off-roading. Now, both of those are great options, but I think we're gonna find something even a little stronger. Maybe we're LTs looking in the weeds.
Now, we think this is the axle that we need. It's a GM 10.5 inch 14-bolt full floater, and it's probably the strongest junkyard axle that we're gonna find. So let's get started tearing it out.
Woohoo! Yeah. That's a showing of who's boss. think she's free. Yeah, baby.
About 20 minutes later, we have ourselves a beefy 14-bolt axle for our K5 Blazer. We'll load it up onto a cart and get back to the shop where I can start cleaning it up.
If you like full-size square body trucks as much as we do, then you'll enjoy today's show because we're diving into this full frame-off restoration on our K5 Blazer.
We're actually making really good progress. We have ourselves a new donor rear axle. The frame is looking good, wearing a fresh coat of black. We have a suspension setup that just arrived, and a little bit later on, we're going to show you what we have in mind for the power plant.
And with this milestone complete, we're making good progress on all of our projects this year. $7,500 got us this 89 full size that we immediately took to the trail.
After the first obstacle, it was easy to see why these trucks are so popular with the off-road community and why they still hold their value today. Short wheelbase, big body. These trucks are just plain cool.
We then tore her down to a bare frame, where we found a serious crack under the steering box. It's a common problem on these full-size Chevys, so LT welded in some support plates. Our body got the sandblasting treatment from Blast from the Past in Lebanon, Tennessee, and so did our frame. But while we had it over there, we went ahead and let them powder coat it for us. They put it in a nice satin black finish, and we couldn't be more pleased with the results. Now, the great thing about powder coat is we don't have to worry about it chipping off on us, scratching it up, rust, staining, anything like that. And plus, this only cost about $750. So if you consider how long it would take you to strip it by hand and paint it, it's well worth the investment. Plus, it's kind of a messy job.
One of the things that we learned while out on the trail with our K5 is we need it to be a lot taller. We have a goal of running a 35-inch tall tire. Now that'll give us a great blend between something we can use every day driving down the highway and something we can use on the weekends taking it to the trail. Now to get a 35 under a square body, we need 4 inches of lift. So one called a BDS suspension was all it took to get everything that we'll need. Now it's actually really simple to lift a leaf-sprung straight axle truck. Out front, new springs are all it takes. These are called Ride Glide springs, and they'll give the K5 increased articulation and much more wheel travel. Out back, the basic kit comes with lift blocks, but we chose to upgrade to lift springs. That way we'll have less axle wrap and it'll give us a much more stable ride. For shocks, we chose to upgrade to these Fox 2.0s, and these will give us a great ride on the highway and when we're in the rough stuff out on the trail. Out front, we got dual steering stabilizers, which again use the Fox 2.0 dampers. The kit comes with all the necessary linkage to correct the steering geometry so you'll drive straight while you're going down the road. It comes with all the necessary bushings, hardware, nuts, and bolts, everything you need for a complete installation. Heck, it even comes with this frame reinforcement plate. Now, we already welded one in, but it's just cool to know that you get this stuff. We're going to get started by pushing in some bushings. A little lubrication is all it takes, and the bushings slide right into place. The sleeve is a tight fit, but a few taps with a hammer and it's home. The front of the springs are attached to the spring hanger on the frame, and a little Permatex anti-seize will prevent rust, making the bolts come out easy when the time comes. As a spring compresses, it gets longer, so the leaf springs are attached at the rear with a swing shackle. A few more nuts and bolts and the springs are in. The forward mount of the spring is held to the frame with a single bolt, but the shackles install a bit differently. The outside half is attached, and with bolts through, the inside half attaches and nuts hold it all together. And with 4 springs connected to the frame, we're ready for some axles.
We ditched our factory 10-bolt axle for this, a full float 14-bolt we grabbed from the junkyard. And this is probably one of the most popular swaps for any heavy-duty application. And a full float means the axle does not support any of the vehicle weight. It's equipped with a 10.5-inch ring gear and 30 spline axles. Now the reason this thing is so popular is because it's cheap. It's strong, and aftermarket support for it is huge. Now we'll more than likely re-gear it and add a locker, but first we need to relocate these leaf spring perches so this thing will fit under our Blazer. The first thing we need to do is remove a couple of bolts to get rid of this brake line. Then I can start cutting off the spring perches with our plasma cutter. The perches on a 14 bolt are really thick and it takes some time to cut through them, so a little patience is involved. Then we can remove the brackets that hold the bump stops in place. After getting those cut away, I'll clean up the metal left behind.
This is the Dana 44 front axle that came with our Chevy Blazer, and it's actually the same thing as a GM 10-bolt front axle, and they're actually pretty strong. We could just throw it back underneath the truck and be good to go, but we would have one minor problem. This is a 6-bolt axle and the rear is an 8. We could just buy the same style of wheel in 2 different bolt patterns, but if we were out on the trail and we got a flat tire, then we'd have to carry 2 spare tires. A better solution would be to find a Dana 60 axle that would have come in a K30 Chevy truck of the same style as our Blazer. They're super strong and it would have the same spring pad width, so it would bolt right in place. But here's the problem. Dana 60s from a leaf-sprung Chevy truck are near impossible to find. We've been searching around our local area for a couple of months now and we've come up empty-handed. Now there is a way we can still use this axle and have 8 lugs. Now, certain Chevy K20 trucks actually came from the factory with an 8-lug Dana 44. So we're going to take advantage of that, use some OEM replacement parts, and convert this axle into an 8-lug. Now, we will still keep our eyes open for a Dana 60, but if we can't find one, then we'll still have a good, inexpensive alternative.
Well, we have one side of our axle prepped and ready for a new leaf spring perch. Now, on most newer trucks, the leaf springs sit out much wider on the axle than they do under our K5, like they did on this axle. That's the reason we went ahead and cut away the bump stop bracket, because the new leaf spring perch is going to move in quite a bit and take up that space. Now, we're attacking this job one side at a time, because we're going to use the original leaf spring perch to find our pinion angle. All we want to do is set an angle finder on top and read the degree. Then take another one and set it on top of our new leaf spring perch and mirror the other side. This way it's almost impossible to screw it up. Your pinion angle will be correct and you probably save yourself a little time. The perches need to be 42.5 inches center to center to match the K5. So I'll take a couple of measurements and make a couple of marks where the perches need to be. Then match up the degree of the original perch. Once we're happy and we know where the perch will live, I'll tack it in using our Miller-Matic 252. Then repeat the process on the other side. We're continuing progress getting our 14-bolt fit under our K5. We've got the original leaf spring perches cut off and the new ones are tack welded in and everything fits great. Now the perches are ready to be fully welded. But before we do that, we want to test fit our shocks. Now we were hoping the original shock mounts on the 14-bolt would work for us, but they won't, and let me show you why. You can see they're set over just a few inches too far, and if we tried to put the shock into them, it would just put it in a bind and that wouldn't work. But hey, that's no big deal. All we're going to do is use a set of aftermarket shock mounts. We'll bolt it onto the shock and then move it up into place and make sure we've got clearance everywhere, tack weld it in, and we'll cut these old ones off. I'll get the passenger side shock mount in place and then tack weld it in. We'll repeat the process on the other side. Then roll the axle out from under the frame so I can finish weld everything.
We've got the front axle back underneath the Blazer and it bolts up to the BDS lift springs without any customization because it's the original front axle. So we'll get started on our 8-lug conversion by taking off the calipers. Next up, unscrew the outer part of the freewheeling hub. There are a couple of snap rings that have to go, and the lockout can be pulled away. With both spindle nuts removed, the old rotor comes off. Finally, the backing plate has to go. With the disassembly complete, we need to talk about how we're going to put this back together with 8 lugs. Now, first of all, if you have a 6-lug Dana 44 from the early 70s, you're going to have to swap out the spindle. See, the earlier versions used a smaller wheel bearing. Later versions like ours already got updated to the big bearing spindle, so we won't have to make any changes there. Next up is the caliper mount and backing plate. You cannot reuse the original 6-lug version. Now these are a little bit harder to find, but we found a set on eBay and they're being shipped to us now, so we're going to leave those off temporarily. Next up is just a couple of generic part store replacement items, like a 3/4 ton 8-lug hub and rotor assembly, as well as a few wheel bearings. Now the cool part about this swap is you can actually reuse all your original locking hubs, so that'll save you a little bit of money for parts. We're assembling everything temporarily without any seals or grease, since we'll be pulling this whole thing back apart in the near future to install the brake backing plates. Now this 8-lug conversion is something you can do in an afternoon, and it'll save you a ton of money over having to buy a Dana 60. You excited as I am?
I don't know if I'm as excited as you are.
This is the best part of the project, when we get to make a rolling chassis. All right, pretty close. Let's put it up in the air, get those stands out. How's my side look?
From what I can see, it looks okay.
All right, it's home. Let's bolt it up. As far as lift kits are concerned, this installation is about as simple as they come. Between the 4 new leaf springs and the Fox 2.0 shocks, this Blazer will have a great ride on and off the trail. Now, when it comes to steering, there are 2 different options. BDS supplies geometry-corrected brackets that'll work with the lift, or you can choose to swap out to a crossover-style steering.
You know, we got both axles under the frame and we're happy with where this 14 bolt sits, but they're not going to stay under there like this. We'll probably yank the 14 bolt out and re-gear it, but not only that, we'll wire wheel everything down, clean it up, and get a fresh coat of paint on them so they match this good looking frame.
With the rolling chassis of our K5 officially mocked up, we're at the point of this project that we need to decide how we're going to motivate this Blazer down the highways and up the mountains. We need to pick an engine and a transmission, and have a way to split that power between the rear axle and the front.
Well, I know one thing, we're not running those small tires. We've got something a little bigger in mind. But what is the best way to move a heavy truck with big tires down the road?
Well, I suppose we need a whole lot of power.
And a whole lot of torque.
What engine comes to mind when you need something that produces a boatload of torque? For us, it's the big block Chevy.
We picked up this 454 HO crate engine a while back, and it's been sitting in the corner waiting on the perfect project. And this is it.
This engine comes out of the crate with 438 horsepower and a whopping 500 pound-feet of torque at only 3,500 RPM. And that could definitely get us into a little bit of trouble, but not enough. This is a good foundation to build from. It comes with a 4-bolt main block, forged steel connecting rods and crankshaft, and forged aluminum pistons. Now we're going to make some changes. We're going to yank the heads off, put some aluminum heads on there that flow a lot more air, change the induction around, change the camshaft. We have a goal of about 600 horsepower.
For a trans to go behind that big 454, we chose a 4L80 from Monster Transmission, and we went a little bit different. We chose a full manual valve body, so there's no computer needed to shift this thing. And we chose their Super Sport version because it's rated up to 750 horsepower. And to connect the engine and transmission together, we grabbed a 3,000 RPM stall speed converter without a lockup clutch. And the next time you guys see this thing, we'll mate the two together and do a few engine mods.
Today we're working on our '89 Chevy Blazer that we've nicknamed Classy K5.
You like that name, don't you?
I feel like it suits me.
Now, what makes you think that?
I've had 2 or 3 people tell me on different occasions, they say, LT, you're a pretty classy guy.
Now, where were you when they told you this?
That's really not important. What's important is our Blazer. Now the body, it's a little ways away from being reunited with the frame, but we're making progress every day.
Since the last time you guys saw this thing, unfortunately, We've been busy metalworking. We picked up what was a pretty clean Blazer, but when we got it back from the sandblaster, it had a little bit of rust. So we got it into epoxy primer, we cut out all the cancer, welded in new sheet metal, and then primed our patches. So now, we got a solid body.
We've taken that solid body and mounted it onto a rotisserie. This will let us flip the body upside down so we have easy access to do a bunch of work. Check it out.
It's nice having one of these around the shop.
All right, that good?
Yep.
All right.
All right, for example, here's a patch panel we didn't have just laying around. So this started as a flat piece of sheet metal. I then bead rolled this hump in to match the factory stamping and butt welded in the sheet metal. Now, while we have access to all this, it's a perfect time to give the underside a good coating. It'll seal and protect all of the metal, but not only that, make it look really good. So, give this Blazer a new lease on life. And since we want a quiet, cool ride in our Blazer, we're going to coat the bottom side with lizard skin. We'll start off with a coat of their sound control, followed up by a coat of their ceramic insulation. Now, the sound control will dampen vibrations and kill any road noise we may have. But not only that, it'll protect our Blazer so it lasts for years. Now, one thing that I love about these products is that they're environmentally friendly and they clean up easy with water. So you don't have to worry about making a huge mess in your shop. All we need to do now is scuff the bottom side and do a little bit of masking. How's it going over here?
Making progress.
Lizard skin cannot be applied over bare metal, so make sure you prime the surface where you plan to use it. Since our primer is past the window to be top coated, we need to make sure we scuff it up so the lizard skin sticks. For this, we're using a red scuff pad. Then we can mask the edges of the sheet metal just to save time on cleanup. This is Lizard Skin's Super Pro application kit. It comes with this gun that has a 1-quart cup, the stir paddle, and a mil thickness gauge so you see how much you have applied to the panel. There is no mixing involved, so once it's stirred, it can go straight into the gun. We're starting by laying down 1 coat of the sound control. Now, for these products to work at their full potential, you'll always lay this product down first before the ceramic insulation. And the Lizard Skin Super Pro sprayer handles the thickness of the material with ease. 1 coat will give us right around 20 mils of thickness. We'll let that flash for a few minutes and lay down 1 more coat, giving us a total of 40 mils. With the sound control laid down, we need to wait 24 to 36 hours before we lay down the ceramic insulation. This gives the water in the product time to evaporate. If we went ahead and laid down the ceramic over the wet sound control, this could cause blistering down the road and the 2 products would separate. So make sure you read the instructions before you spray this stuff. 24 hours later, we're ready to lay down the ceramic insulation. This is a thermal coating that can withstand up to 500 degrees. And not only will we spray the bottom of our K5, but we'll end up spraying the inside as well. This will cut down our interior temps up to 30 degrees. I'm covering the floor of the cab and the bed floor, but I'm staying out of the wheel wells. We coated them with sound control to eliminate road noise, but there is no heat created in the wheel well. So don't waste any product where it's not needed. Save it for the next project. Well, there you go. Not only does it look good, we've got 1 quiet, cool, classy K5.
Hold on. Did you say classy?
I give up.
I'm here.
I give up.
Come on, man.
I'm going home.
I'm classy.
With the underside of our K5 curing and our LB7 all squared away, it's time to address the engine and transmission that's going in our Blazer.
Last time we showed you guys what we plan to run underneath the hood. We've got a 454 big block and a 4L80 with a full manual valve body we picked up from Monster Transmission. And we got a whole bunch of parts to get these 2 together.
You want to do this?
Sounds good. I'll do the flex split, you do the converter.
I'll prime this converter.
As always, we need to first fill the converter with fluid. Then engage it into the trans.
There we go. 3 clunks.
On 454s, this counterweight will balance the engine. We grab this flex plate from Summit Racing and the hardware from ARP.
Next, I'll attach an extension housing on the back of the trans. And then can mate the engine and transmission together.
All right, you got that all set?
Yeah, man, ready.
Bring her in. Whoa.
Coming in hot. After we get the torque converter bolts all tightened up, we can install our K5's original motor mounts back onto the block, as well as the urethane trans mount we got from Summit Racing onto the extension housing.
We'll lift the engine and trans, come on, pull, and lower them into the frame. The stock small block mounts line up. Boom, she's in.
Money.
And some 1/2-inch bolts will hold it in place. And with the engine and trans in place, we'll do the same thing for our direct fit replacement fuel tank we got from rockauto.com. We picked up a replacement sending unit without a fuel pump because we need to install a higher capacity one later on. Well, our rolling chassis is basically complete. Next time you guys see Classy K5, we're going to be bringing that body back onto the frame. Today, we're going to be working on our '89 K5 Blazer, specifically the axles. Now, we already swapped out the rear for a 14-bolt full floater, and we've converted the original Dana 44 front axle to a 6-lug. Now, the body for the K5 is sitting in the prep station and is bolted to the rotisserie. We're really close to being able to lay down some paint and jam out the interior and the firewall. Now, Jeremy's off this week, so I've asked our friend John to come in and lend us a hand getting it ready. Hey, man, how's it going? What are you up to?
Hey, LT, just scuffing up the inside, getting it ready for some color.
Cool, we're pretty close?
Pretty close.
Now, I've shown you the color that we picked out. It's the blue. How do you think it's going to look on this classic Blazer?
It's a great color blue, and I think it's going to look pretty awesome.
Awesome, man. Well, thanks for the help.
Yep.
Well, we've got a ton of parts coming in every single day. It kind of looks like a mess around here. All this stuff is sheet metal and exterior parts from LMC Truck. It's really going to help us out dressing out the outside of that truck. Now, the great thing about working in the tech center is there's always somebody around to lend us a hand when we're short-staffed. So I'm going to go next door to Detroit Muscle, see if anybody's home. Hey, guys, what you working on?
Chevelle, something cool. What about you?
You know, I don't know anything about cool stuff, but I do have something really heavy that I need lifting. Whose game?
Mark's.
Back's been.
Oh, your back's been hurting?
Yeah. And I got a bone in my thumb. I don't know if I can help you out with that or not.
That's exactly what I need. I have a big, heavy front axle I need lifted out, and bony thumbs, they'll help me out.
There
What do
you
you
go.
say?
Yeah, I don't want
I'll buy you lunch.
All right. I do
Come
like
on,
to eat.
man. All right.
Good luck.
Now I'm going to need more than that, boss man. So, Hero, this your jewel, if you will?
This is it. This is the K5.
Man, so what's the plans with this piece of the project, if you will?
Well, we dented the fender, so naturally we did a restoration.
Well, I guess to get this thing finished, we need to get started. You want to grab some tools or a jack or something?
Yeah, I'll grab a jack. We'll get this axle out.
You ready to let it down?
I'm ready.
You want it nice and easy or like fast and hot?
Oh, just drop it. Oh, he did.
This is a rough spot, ain't it?
All right, let's give it a shot.
I gotta get under. You know what's the best part about this?
What's that?
You've got a crane. You just need
You don't
company.
say.
You just needed company.
The rear axle in our Blazer has 410 gears in it, which is actually perfect for the size of tire that we plan on running. The front has 308, so we definitely need to re-gear the front to match the rear. We went to Yukon Gear and Axle and picked up this 411-to-1 ring and pinion set. Now on a Dana 44, 411 is actually as close as you can get to 410. And that minor difference in ratio isn't going to give us any problems. I mean, I guess unless we're running 100 miles an hour in four-wheel drive on pavement, which we aren't going to do. So we also picked up a master installation kit. It has all the necessary shims, bearings, and seals we need for a complete installation. Out back, the only thing we really want to do is add traction. So we picked up a Yukon Grizzly locker and an open carrier to put it in. So I'm going to get started by tearing apart that front. I'll start by removing the locking hub, spindle nut, and brake rotor. Next, the tie rod and steering stabilizer are removed. So, I can have room to unbolt and remove the diff cover. I'll tip the housing and drain out the fluid.
Soupy.
Next, I'll remove the retaining nuts and pry off the spindle. Now the axle shaft can come out. The same process has to be repeated on the other side so I can remove the driver's side axle shaft. I'll mark the bearing caps so I can reinstall them later in the original position. With a little persuasion, the carrier can be removed from the housing. I'll flip the axle and zap off the pinion nut. Then use an air hammer to drive the pinion out of the bearing. The yoke comes off, and I can punch out the larger pinion bearing race. These special long punches from Matco make it really easy to remove the old bearing races. We're back on truck tech, regearing the front 10-bolt in our K5 Blazer. One important thing to remember about the 10-bolt, left-hand thread. With all the nuts removed, a few good whacks with a favorite hammer removes the ring gear. Fries are done. Using a bearing splitter and our shot press, the carrier bearings are removed and I can clean up the carrier in the parts washer. With everything neat and sanitary, I can install the new 411 ring gear onto the old carrier and snug them down with an impact. Back at the shop press, the new carrier bearings are pushed into place, along with a pinion bearing and a shim. Back at the axle, I'm going to scrape off the sealing surface and clean the inside of the housing with brake cleaner. I can drive in the big pinion race with this soft aluminum driver. Flip the housing and install the smaller front race. Now we're at the point of the regearing process that's generally considered the most difficult, setting the pinion depth. Now there are some fancy tools that you can buy that'll take some measurements down in the case and it'll tell you exactly how thick of a shim you need to install so you nail it the first time. But those tools are very expensive and you tend not to use them that much. I mean, how often are you changing gears? So the alternative method is trial and error. I went ahead and I pressed the original 40 thousandths shim in between the pinion and the bearing. Now this should actually get us pretty close to our target. So what we'll do is we'll install it in the case, we'll paint the gear in the carrier, throw everything together and run a pattern check. And if we have to, we'll just pop it back apart, press the bearing off and add or subtract shim thickness until we get the right pattern. Now I'm gonna cross my fingers and hopefully we get it right the first time. The pinion comes through and the bearing goes on, along with the yoke and nut. But no crush collar or seal just yet. I'll tighten it until no play is felt. Next, the carrier drops in, followed by the caps and the bolts. I'll apply some yellow gear marking compound to both sides of a couple teeth and rotate the gears back and forth a few times. The paint will wear off where the gears touch, showing the contact area. Now I'm actually pretty happy with the pattern that we got right out of the box using all of the original shims. Ideally, you want that little wear spot to be centered on the face of the tooth of the gear, both up and down and side to side. Your gear set will come with instructions that show you acceptable patterns as well as improper patterns and how to correct them. Now I can tell by feel that the backlash is just a little bit too tight, but that's okay because I need to focus on pinion depth first. Backlash is easy to fix later on. Now just by looking at the pattern, I think it needs to be a little bit deeper to the root of the gear. Now that means I have to add some pinion shims to get it closer to the ring gear. So I'll take this thing apart, add about 5 to 7 thousandths worth of shim and check her again. I'll remove the pinion nut and yoke and drive the pinion back out of the housing. Over at the press, the bearing is removed, a shim added, and the bearing is pressed back into place. Everything is reinstalled and I'll check the pattern. It's right where I want it, so we can move on to final assembly. We're halfway done regearing the front 10 bolt from our K5 Blazer. I'll start by setting the small pinion bearing onto the race and driving the oil seal into the housing. The pinion is slid through, the yoke goes on, and it's followed by the washer and nut. I've got the yoke drawn down onto the pinion, and we're ready to move on to the next most important step of setting up gears, pinion bearing preload. Now that's basically just a measurement of how much force it takes to rotate the pinion installed in the housing. It's controlled by how far apart the two pinion bearings are. Now earlier, you saw me install a crush collar onto the axle. It's basically just a small metal sleeve that compresses as you tighten it. The more it compresses, the closer the bearings get, and the more drag there is. Now here's the kicker. You can actually use that impact gun to compress the crush collar, but it's very easy to go too far. And if you do, you can't just back off the nut and expect the crush collar to spring back out. It doesn't work that way. You have to take everything back apart and install a new crush collar. That's why they give you two. Now the slower but more accurate method is doing it by hand. A pinion holding tool is secured to the yoke, and a breaker bar can be used to slowly tighten the nut, compressing the crush collar. I'll frequently check to feel the drag, and when it feels close, I'll take a first measurement. It comes in right at 11 inch-pounds, but the spec is 14 to 19. A quick turn later, and we're right on the money. I'll flip the housing back around, and the carrier can go into place along with some shims. With the deeper pinion depth, the original shims would have been too tight, so I guessed and adjusted it by 15 thousandths. A dial indicator will tell the tale. Right on the money, first time out of the gate. Backlash is simply just a measurement of the free space in between the gears, and you can even hear it as I wiggle the carrier back and forth. Now we got really lucky because ours came in right on the money. Spec calls for between 3 and 6 thousandths, and we measured 5. But here's how to adjust backlash if it's not correct. If the measurement is too low or tight, you simply move some shims around to shift the carrier away from the pinion. And the inverse is also true. If you measure too high or too loose, shift it back towards the pinion. Now this gear set is done and ready to be covered back up. A new gasket seals the deal, and the original bolts hold it all together. We have some steering upgrades planned, so I need to take off the passenger side knuckle. With the top and bottom nut removed, a couple good whacks with a hammer, and it's free. Woohoo! We're gonna replace our original knuckle with this 4-stud flat top conversion that we got from Reed Racing. The Reed knuckle installs with OE replacement ball joints and accepts many commonly available 4-bolt high steer arms. The knuckle will allow us to use the original tie rod, and with this high steer arm bolted up from Summit Racing, we can now run crossover steering for a more stable ride. The axle shaft can now go back in, followed by the spindle and the backing plate. The 8-lug hub and rotor go on, and now the spindle nut can be tightened down, setting preload. A washer and additional nut makes sure it won't back out. Now the locking hub can go back in. To finish up our front axle, we went ahead and grabbed a set of remanufactured brake calipers, and we're gonna go ahead and fill them with these EBC Truck Yellow Stuff Sport brake pads. Now we're gonna be adding some bigger, heavier tires, and we've already added a lot more horsepower, so we don't wanna skip on any safety items, and stopping power is definitely important. These will give us 30% more braking power than stock, and they won't fade with heat after repeated heavy use. During the rebuild of our '89 K5 Blazer, we pulled out the original small block and the 700 R4 automatic. We wanted to replace them with something just a little bit stronger. So we installed a 454 big block and a 4L80 automatic transmission. But we haven't talked about the transfer case yet. Now we could search around and find an NP205 or step up to an exotic aftermarket transfer case. But with the style of build that we're doing, that's really not necessary because we're only running about a 35-inch tall tire. Now this is the NP241 that actually came originally in our K5 Blazer. It's a chain-driven transfer case with a 272-to-1 low range. And as far as strength goes, it's actually pretty strong, so we want to reuse it behind that 4L80. But there is one small problem, and that has to do with the output shaft on our new transmission. The 700R4 that came attached to our transfer case uses a 27 spline output, where the 4L80 uses a 32. So the input shaft from our original transfer case clearly isn't going to line up. Now, certain vehicles actually came from the factory with a 4L80 and an NP241, so we know that the two can mate together with the right part. We called up Monster Transmission and we grabbed a 32 spline input for the NP241. And as you can see, they'll clearly line right up. So I'm going to show you guys how to make this input work in that transfer case. I'll remove the tail housing, the speedometer gear, the rear bearing support, the speedometer drive gear, and split the halves of the case. The snap ring has to come off so the main shaft, chain, and front drive sprocket can all lift out as one, followed by both shift forks. I'll throw the case in the parts washer to clean it up and make everything look presentable. Back at the table, I have to drive a plug and needle bearing into the new input shaft. Then I can install a thrust washer into the low-range planetary. Next, I'll install the input shaft, another thrust washer, spacer, snap ring, and we're in action. The planetary assembly installs into the case with a few gentle taps, and it gets secured with another snap ring, and the front seal can be installed. I'll flip the case, install both shift forks and sleeves, then the main shaft and chain can be installed into the case, along with a snap ring. I'll apply some silicone and install the rear case half and oil pump, the bearing support and snap ring, the tail shaft housing, and lastly, the speedometer drive gear assembly. Our Blazer chassis is coming together, and with the front axle complete, we'll turn our attention to the rear. Since our K5 will be a daily driven weekend wheeler, we need to get inside the rear differential and upgrade to a mechanical locker. The first step is to separate the ring gear. We're going to be reusing our original ring and pinion gear set from the 14-bolt. Now, the axle originally came to us with a limited slip carrier. Now, the Yukon Grizzly locker needs to be installed into an open differential, so we also had to pick up an open housing from Yukon Gear and Axle. After I get this ring gear cleaned up, we can put it all together. A quick bath in the parts washer removes all the old gear oil and dirt. The first half of the open carrier goes down, and the Yukon Grizzly locker sets inside. Then, the other half of the carrier can be set on top. Bolts are installed through both halves of the open carrier and into the ring gear, holding the whole thing together. Tighten them down in a crisscross pattern. Over at the press, I can install new bearings using an old race as a spacer. Back at the axle, the carrier can go in, followed by the bearing caps. I'll use the threaded side adjusters to set backlash and check it with a dial indicator.
About 8 to 9 thousandths. Pretty happy with that.
Once it's set, I'll install the adjuster locks and cover up our new locker with our old cover. We've got that rear 14-bolt locked up and she's ready to rock. And the front 10-bolt has been re-geared to match and it has some new brakes. Now I still have to build out the other side and get this thing cleaned up and throw on a fresh coat of paint, but we're making progress every day.
Our 1989 K5 Blazer is about halfway through a frame-off customization at this point. Now, it's been a while since you've seen it, and it's come a long way from where we started earlier last season. We picked up a pretty clean Blazer, and before we did any work, we got her out on the trail. And we pushed that old TBI 350 as hard as we could. Now, to make it up most any obstacle, we had to have our foot buried on the gas pedal. We knew that once we added larger tires, the stock engine just wasn't going to cut it. So we replaced it with this big block Chevy. And it makes about 430 horsepower right now, and hey, that's pretty good. But we've got something in mind a little later on that's going to pump up the power just a bit. Woo-hoo! Lay in it, go. Once we got onto the trails, it quickly became evident that the stock axles had a few shortcomings that we would have to address and improve our Blazer's off-road capabilities.
You know that little 10-bolt that may not like the tires that we have in mind for this thing.
We took care of the rear axle with a 14-bolt full floater we sourced from a junkyard and fitted it with 410 gears and a grizzly locker. Up front, we kept the original 10-bolt but re-geared it. And we also converted it to an 8-lug bolt pattern using Dana 44 parts. And while we were at it, we swapped over to this Reed Racing high steer knuckle so we could convert to crossover steering. Now we also took some time and coated the bottom side of our K5 with lizard skin. Not only will this help protect our metal, it's also going to give us a nicer, quieter ride when we're headed down the road. Now the cab is pretty much ready to go back on the chassis for good, but we're going to take this opportunity since it's on the rotisserie and paint a few of those places that would be hard to get to if it were all together. And the places we plan to tackle are the firewall and the inside of the cab. Now, normally we are at the stage where we would test fit everything together to ensure we don't run into any problems. But since Blazers did come with big blocks, pretty much the setup we have in there, I don't think we're gonna have much to worry about. Plus, I don't know where LT is, but I think he's hiding out on us, so we're just gonna go ahead and progress what we can. Since we already have a nice smooth finish, there's no need for a high build primer or to do any wet sanding. We just want to scratch the surface so our paint has something to bite into for good adhesion. For this, I'm using a red scuff pad. Now there's no special technique here, we just want to make sure we hit every inch where paint plans to lay. Now the same prep goes for the inside of the cab. Now what we plan to paint is the dash, the inside of the A pillars, the roof, and the B pillars. Now this means pretty much anything an interior panel does not cover is still going to look really sweet. The next thing we need to do before paint is a little masking. Now even though we're not really worried about overspray on the outside of the truck since we're going to put the exterior into high build primer, we want to protect the bottom of the truck that's already been finished in lizard skin. And masking will also help prevent any trash from blowing into our fresh paint. To do this, I'm using overspray protective sheeting and I'm locking it down with 2-inch tape. One of the hardest decisions you have to make when doing a full build like this is choosing a color. Now we knew on our Blazer we wanted to go with a blue. And I didn't want anything over the top, but I wanted just enough that when you saw it rolling down the road, it caught your eye. So after a lot of back and forth, I decided on Protronic Blue. This color looks killer, and believe it or not, it came off of a BMW. Wipe it down with wax and grease remover, and rub down the area as we plan to spray with a tack rack. The first product we're going to lay down is a gray sealer. It mixes 2:1 to 1/2 with an activator and reducer. I always recommend laying down a sealer first. It will make the end result of your paint job better taking this extra step, but not only that, this will minimize how much base coat you had to lay down because you're making your panel a uniform color, therefore saving you some money by not having to put down more base. Now I'm spraying this at 16 PSI at the inlet of the gun, and all we need is one even coat. After about a 20-minute flash time, we're ready for base. Our Protronic Blue mixes 1:1 with reducer. Now, since this is a metallic paint, it's crucial to have your gun set up properly, and we've shown you how to do this quite a few times. So after a quick test panel on the wall, we're ready to get at it. I'm also spraying this base at 16 PSI at the inlet of the gun, making sure to make nice even passes with the gun, a consistent distance from the panel around 8 inches. This will ensure that all of that metallic flake lays down evenly. And I'm laying down 3 coats. And the last thing to go down is clear coat. This clear mixes 4:1 with activator and reducer. Now be sure when spraying you use the reducer that's right for the temperature you're spraying in. This plays a big part in how well the product lays down on the panel. A good tip for you guys that plan to paint a car or truck in your future, or a multitude of them, it's always a good idea to have an arsenal of guns. And what I mean by that is I typically have a gun to spray each one of my materials. I have a primer gun, I have a sealer and base coat gun like we just used on the Blazer, and I have a clear coat gun. Now on my base coat gun, I normally run a 1-3 tip. That kind of breaks the paint down and atomizes it a little better so it lays out nice and even. And on my clear coat gun, I run a 1-4 tip. That gets a little more material out onto the panel. Now, the reason I like to use a clear coat gun separate from a base gun is you're always running different colors through your base gun. And no matter how good you think you clean it, there may be a little debris left behind. So say you've shot like a white car or something, and then you put some clear in your base gun and you have a little bit of debris come out from an old paint job, and you're stuck trying to figure out how you're gonna get it out, or you're respraying the panel. It's always a safe bet, have a few guns laying around. Well, we've got the clear coat laid down, everything slicked out, and this thing looks awesome. This blue is really gonna pop with all the metallic and the pearl in it. I can't wait to see it outside. Gets me really excited to do the exterior of this thing, but we're gonna wheel this into the shop, see if we can make a little more headway. We got everything unmasked and got the K5 body off the rotisserie and onto the lip. So the next thing for us is to get the K5 frame under this body.
I like the color.
Man, where have you been?
What do you mean?
Well, I said the word sanding, and I heard tires squealing in the parking lot. I should have known that was you.
I know how much you enjoy paint and bodywork, and it's really not my thing. I didn't want to take that away from you, so I had to go do some shopping.
Well, man, you better be glad you brought that. But you're not having fun with that yet. You're gonna help me get this frame under here.
All right, I'll get this out of the way. This is always an exciting time during a build, because the project really starts to take shape. It's a significant milestone, and we can start to envision what the finished truck will look like.
Somewhere in there.
To isolate the body from the frame, we picked up a new cab mount kit from LMC Truck. Man, that big block's a tight fit, but I think it's gonna clear just fine. We'll get the frame and the cab lined up. Then we can attach the lower mounts and install the hardware.
Tell you what, man, the nice thing about having a truck all lifted up like this is I'm sitting on the ground and I still have headroom.
I know it, man. A lot different than working on those low trucks.
Yeah.
We're showing you guys a little different method on this K5, especially when it comes to the body and paint. Now, in the past, we've shown you high-end restorations where we go through the mock-up stages and we spray everything blown apart. That's kind of the preferred way to do it. But we've also shown you resprays where we paint everything together. Now, on this K5, we went ahead and shot the firewall on the inside of the cab and mounted the body to the frame, and it's gonna stay there. What we're gonna do is mask everything up and protect it when we do our body work. Now, this method is kind of for the guy who wants a frame-off restoration, but maybe you don't have the room to keep everything blown apart. And not only that, this is an off-road rig. This is not a $100,000 build. We're gonna bash on this thing. But basically, we're just showing you another method. You can get the same result.
The next move for us is to hang some sheet metal, completing the front end of this truck. Our original parts were actually in pretty good shape, we thought. So we sent them off to the sandblaster along with the rest of the truck. But when we got them back, we realized they weren't really that great. Nothing major, just a whole bunch of little rust holes and dents. So we just decided, what the heck, let's start over. One of the reasons that we use LMC trucks so much is because they have such an extensive inventory of sheet metal for these classic square body Chevys. So we got one of everything. Got a couple of doors to replace the one that somebody dented out on the trail, along with a couple inner fenders and outer fenders. We got a cowl induction hood to spice things up just a little bit in the styling department. Our original core support had rusted out pretty badly underneath the battery tray. Some acid had just dripped down over time and caused a big giant hole. So we replaced it. But we ordered one from a mid-'80s Chevy truck with the double stacked headlights just to give it a little bit more of a classic look. And this is the first part that we're gonna put on.
We'll throw on the new rubber isolators and set the core support in place.
Where's your bolts?
I got it right here, buddy. It's secured with new hardware, all from LMC. This is a tall truck.
Where'd you go?
Well, what do you think? Is she gonna fit right out of the gate?
I sure hope so, but you know how that goes.
Yeah, it never does.
Well, right off the bat, I mean, it's not awful, but the body line doesn't quite match up. So let's see if we can get that a little better.
Up we go. Ready?
All right, go up with it. All right, let's see what we got.
Try it again.
The body line looks good, but we're hitting somewhere, yep, right along the drip rail. Yeah, I remember that. It was a problem we had when we tore the truck down. The drip rail's got just a little bit of a bow in it. So all we're gonna do is finesse that drip rail up a little bit, get us a good gap, and we should be good to go.
You got your two favorite tools for you.
Ah, big hammer. You can't go wrong with that. Oh yeah, nice even gap. That looks really good. We got the other door hung and aligned, and it's starting to come together. But before we get to hanging these fenders, we're gonna install the original K5 door latches in our new door. This way we can shut the door, it'll stay exactly where we want it to live, and we can properly align our fenders. We'll clean up the latch and paint it later on. But for now, it will be attached to the door with a few number 3 Phillips screws.
The front fenders are up next.
Somewhere in there.
I notice how you never trust me with the shiny end.
Why is that?
Well, you know, we'll start a bolt into the cowling and check the alignment between the fender and door, paying close attention to the body lines. It is a bit low, so a couple of shims are needed to make the correction. We'll install a couple more bolts in the core support and one more on the bottom of the fender.
Next up, we'll attach the hood hinges to the cowling. Then the hood can be lifted into place. A third set of hands helps hold everything in place so there's no risk of scratching that fresh paint. Then we'll give it a test. Well, we've got a little more tweaking to do, but for the first attempt, it's not too bad.
Hey, it looks pretty good, man. One of the most important steps that you can take when you're restoring a vehicle is doing this, completely mocking up all the sheet metal before you paint it. Now, it might seem like we're making just a little bit more work for ourselves, because think about it. We got to pull all this stuff back off, prep it, paint it, and then put it all back on the vehicle. But consider this for a second. The body, it's been sitting on a rotisserie for the past couple months. It's now bolted onto our frame with new body mounts, so everything could have moved around just a little bit. And on top of that, we have all new sheet metal. So if we took that risk and we painted everything first before we tested it, well, there's always that slight chance that something won't fit perfectly. We have to grind off just a little bit of paint, make the repair, and blend some new paint back in. So it's all about working smarter and not harder. Take a couple of minutes, mock up the body, and you'll save yourself a lot of headaches.
Okay, we've got our K5 to a stage. We're ready to start bodywork, and there's a couple of ways we could go about this. One is we could skim coat the entire panel with filler and then block it flat. We would then prime it, block it again, and probably do that a couple of times until we got it laser straight. But our K5 is in such good shape, we're gonna find the few low spots that we have, we're gonna just filler work those, we're gonna put it in primer and sand it for paint. And this is still gonna give us a super nice paint job that we can certainly be proud of. But we also have to keep in mind, we're gonna have this thing off-road, we're gonna run it through some trails. So there's always a chance we could bend a panel or scratch the paint job. And it may hurt my feelings a little bit, but that's something we have to keep in mind. So to go all out with a full-blown show paint job just isn't practical.
Earlier, you guys saw a package that we just got in, and inside is something pretty special, and it's going to transform how that Blazer drives. This is a Procharger D1 SC. It's a centrifugal supercharger, and depending on which pulley we put on, it should put down between 6 and 8 pounds of boost. Now we're shooting for about 600 horsepower, but this head unit will support just a touch over 900.
That should be a blast, but hopefully the next time you guys see this K5, laying down a little paint.
What? No, next time we're gonna be putting on a supercharger.
Now, if I knew if I said the word paint, you'd go run it.
Look, nobody wants to see block sanding and priming. We've seen it a lot. You know what? This is new and exciting. Let's do this next time.
I'll tell you what, no doubt, that's gonna be fun, but first, we're gonna paint the truck.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, and if you remember the last time you guys saw the K5, we did a little bit of paint work. We set the body down on the chassis, and we hung and aligned some sheet metal. Now, the K5's out in the booth, ready for a little primer. And that's where we're gonna start. But before we get to the Blazer, we're gonna talk a little bit about primer. Now, in the automotive industry today, there's 4 primers you need to know about, and it's important to know what each one of them do, because if you use one of them improperly, it could ruin the end result of your paint job. Now, the first one up is an etch primer. This is a great DTM primer, which means direct to metal. It's a good foundation if you plan to lay down a high build primer, because some of those aren't DTM. But not only that, if you have a panel that's in in bare metal and it's gonna sit for a while and you don't want it to surface rust on you, this is a good coat to lay down. Next up is epoxy primer. Now this is my go-to primer when I have bare metal. It's a great foundation coat. It's gonna protect that fresh bare metal, but not only that, it's a good ground coat to build upon. We can add fillers and other materials on the top of it. But these two primers aren't designed to layer up and block down to get a level surface. They're not really meant to sand on, but that's where our high build primers come in. This is a urethane high build surfacer. This is one of the primers you can use over your filler work. It's made to go down in layers and then to be block flat to level your panel. And when applied properly, you get a decent mill thickness out of this, and it's really easy to wet sand. But the primer that I like to use to get a laser straight finish is polyester. This stuff builds like crazy. It can tolerate a very high mill thickness. It's really strong and it doesn't shrink. But not only that, some of your polyesters can be top coated, and like this polyester, it's actually a direct to metal. So you can actually eliminate a couple of steps just by using this. And this is what we're gonna lay down on our Blazer. This polyester primer mixes 4:1 with a catalyst. The gun I'm using has a 2.2 tip. It's important to use the recommended size so the thick primer sprays out of the gun properly. Another thing I do differently from spraying base or clear is open the fluid knob on the gun all the way up. This will make sure we're transferring a nice thick coat onto our panel. And I'm spraying this at 30 psi at the inlet of the gun. And the Blazer body gets 3 coats. All right, we've got our last coat of primer laid down on the Blazer, and it looks really good. And hopefully it'll block out the first time and be ready for paint, but it needs to sit in there and cure for a little bit. As far as these parts go, I primed these a few days ago. They've had time to set up so we can start working on them. So now we can start the most fun you're ever gonna have building a truck, block sanding. And you'll notice there's no LT around, because in reality, it's not that much fun. It's a lot of hard work, but it is one of the most critical steps to get the outcome we want on our Blazer. And to accomplish this, we're gonna use an assortment of blocks because there's a lot of different contours on the Blazer. We'll need everything from round blocks, flat blocks, you name it. And we've got a couple of different grades of sandpaper, but the first thing we're gonna do, lay down some guide coat. I'm using a dry guide coat. Now there is also a wet guide coat, but I use the powder when I plan to dry sand. Now since our hood is a long flat panel, I'm using one of the longer blocks. And we'll start with 180 grit sandpaper. I'm using a crosshatch motion. This will ensure we're blocking the primer down evenly. You want to let the block do the work for you. Doesn't take much pressure to get the job done. Okay, after blocking on the panel for a minute, most of the guide coat has went away, but you can see that there are a few spots that are left behind. Now this is telling me there's a low spot in the panel, just a very small imperfection. But luckily for us, we put on the recommended amount of primer. So there's enough stacked up on the panel that we can continue blocking and level out these areas and get a perfect finish. And with a little more blocking, this area of the hood is level. I'm using guide coat one last time and applying 320 grit paper to the block. Then another round of sanding. And all I'm doing here is getting rid of the 180 grit scratches. Okay, now that's what the finished product should look like to prepare these panels for paint. But as you can see, I've still got quite a bit of work to do, so I'm gonna get after it. Where's LT? Today, we've got a few cool things in store for you, and I'm gonna be working on our '89 K5 Blazer. We've got it all body worked and in primer, and it's ready to start sanding for paint. We've got the body mounted to the frame for good, and all of our suspension work is taken care of. And I would say we definitely have enough clearance for those obstacles out on the trail. And we've also got a cool set of wheels and tires. But speaking of the trail, I think we need to see if we can get a little more power out of that big block. So Got a few new parts over here. We'll work on getting them unboxed. Our 454 HO big block sitting between the frame rails puts out pretty decent power like it sits. It's around 438 horsepower and 500 pound-feet of torque. But like always, we want more power, and we plan to do that with forced induction. And we gave you a teaser a little while back that we plan to run this, a Procharger big block Chevy Supercharger kit, and it comes with everything we need to make it happen. The accessory drive bracket, supercharger bracket, carburetor hat, bypass valve, all the tubes, hoses, and hardware we need, and it even comes with the belts. But the best part is this D1SC supercharger. Its case is constructed of 6061 aluminum billet, so it's bulletproof. And we opted for the polished version, so under the hood, this thing really pops. But the D1SC can support up to 925 horsepower, but we don't plan to go quite that crazy. We want to run somewhere around 6 to 8 pounds of boost, depending on which pulley we run on the front of this thing. The smaller the pulley, the more boost we'll gain. We're hoping for somewhere around 550 to 600 horsepower when it's all said and done. That'll be plenty out on the trail and certainly still comfortable on the highway. But before we can get to bolting any of this on, we've got a few things we need to get on the front of the engine first. We'll get started with a water pump. We picked this water pump up from Summit Racing, and we're installing it using the supplied gaskets and hardware. With the harmonic balancer already installed on our engine, we can bolt on the new crank pulley that will drive our supercharger, followed by the water pump pulley. All right, the next thing to go on our engine is the power steering pump. But before we get to that, we need to install the pulley onto the pump. Now, when you do this, don't try to force it on with a hammer or anything like that, because it only takes a second to destroy this pump or the pulley, and then you're just out more money. So do yourself a favor. Go down to the local parts store and rent one of these power steering pump pulley sets. It comes with the installer. This way, you know you're doing it right the first time and save yourself a little headache. First, thread the tool into the shaft of the pump. Holding the bolt secure, you can then spin the lower nut, which will press the pulley onto the pump. Using the supplied spacers, we can bolt the pump onto the engine. What's really cool about these Procharger kits is how complete they are. But not only that, just like this accessory drive bracket, all the pulleys come already pre-installed, and you have the belt tensioner there as well, so definitely saves you a lot of work. Another cool thing about this setup is it actually takes two different size belts. For the smaller accessory drive system, it takes a 6-rib belt for the alternator, water pump, and stuff like that. But the Supercharger gets its own 8-rib belt. This is going to make sure it gets all the grip that it needs, and when we hammer it to the floor, don't get any belt slippage. Next to go on is the new alternator that we grabbed from Summit Racing. We chose one in a polished finish to match our brackets, and just a couple of bolts secure it in place. You can obviously see that the pulley that's mounted on the alternator right now does not line up with our new accessory drive system, so we're going to get this one yanked off. Luckily for us, Procharger offers a pulley with this setup that has the correct offset, so we know our belt will line up perfectly. Using our 1/2-inch drive impact, we can lock it down. We're moving right along on both of our projects, and as far as the K5 goes, we're getting really close to bolting on some of the fun stuff. We're starting by installing the bracket that will hold the Supercharger in place. Using all of the spacers sit with the kit, the bracket installs on the driver's side head using 3 7/16" bolts. Next up is the D1 Supercharger that bolts right into place. And we're making sure to install it with the label on the Supercharger facing up. Then we'll add 1 6-ounce bottle of oil sent with the Supercharger. One advantage to these setups is the way the brackets and the Superchargers are designed, because a lot of Procharger head units are interchangeable. So let's say down the road you want to build your engine to handle a little more boost. Well, this bracket will hold up to an F2 Supercharger, which can support 1,600 horsepower. Now with our setup, we could have went with the smaller P1 and still met our horsepower goals. But remember, the D1 will support up to 925 horses, so this thing won't even have to work hard to meet the goals we're after. Plus, that leaves us plenty of room if we want to turn it up a little bit. Now, another great thing about a centrifugal supercharger, say over like a root style, is they don't create a ton of heat. So with our setup, we won't have to run an intercooler. Next, we can start running the plumbing from the supercharger up to the carb. We can first install the tube that will hold the bypass valve onto the supercharger. Then the rubber sleeve goes onto the carburetor hat. Then the hat will attach to the tube and it can sit on the carb. Now we're unsure at this point if we want to run a carburetor or some type of fuel injection system, but if we decide to go with a multi-port or a throttle body, this plumbing setup will work with either of those. Now this is not a blow-through carburetor, but next time we may yank this thing off and I'll show you guys how to convert it into one. Now I've still got quite a few odd and ends left to do on this, so I'm going to keep going. Well, today we get to have a little bit of fun. We're going to take our K5 Blazer. It's been sitting in primer for a little while now, and we're going to turn this thing into a piece of jewelry.
Now, you don't really want to listen to what Bumpus says because there is nothing fun about having to do bodywork, and that's why this Blazer's been stuck in paint jail for so long. But we are so close to move on to that next step, get some color on this truck, and move on to the fun stuff.
Normally when I spray a project like this, I'll do it completely disassembled. I'll take the body off the frame and everything's blown apart. This makes it a little easier, and plus you don't have to worry about any overspray. But on this one, we're doing things a little different. We're doing it how you would in your home shop.
So along the way, we've partially assembled the truck. We have some body color on the firewall. The frame has been powder coated. The headers are ceramic coated, and the engine's painted, and everything's looking good. So we want to protect the surfaces that already have coating on them, and we don't want paint to get where it's not supposed to be.
So we'll get everything backmasked with a little 2-inch tape. Backmasking is the only way to do this. It allows you to get paint everywhere it needs to be, but won't allow any paint to go where it doesn't need to. Once I have the tape down, I like to lay down an overspray protective sheeting, which is a very thin plastic. I like to pull the plastic as tight as possible and basically create a wall. Now I know it seems like overkill, but I also like to lay down paper over the plastic. All right, so here's why I like to lay paper down over plastic, even though this plastic is paintable. Now, if you know you can accomplish this job in one day, plastic's fine. It's all you need. But if we know we're gonna spray our base coat today, but maybe we don't get to our clear until tomorrow, there's where we could run into a little bit of a problem, because the air pressure from the gun when we spray our clear may blow the dried base coat off of our plastic into the wet clear coat. We'd be in a world of mess. So that's why I like to lay down paper. It's just safe insurance.
See, one of the techniques that I've developed when it comes to masking a door like this is how you don't have any folds or overlaps, because that'll just hold the trash. Now, an amateur would mask the door using vertical stripes because that has a negative impact on the way that paint actually flows down. It messes with the airflow. You know, it all has to do with gravity and air turbulence. So if you mask your door like this with vertical stripes, you got a couple of loose pockets like this, that's just all wrong. Your paint will never turn out right.
Did you Google that?
No, he's Wikipedia.
Now we can get our K5 rolled into the booth.
Found some traction.
Prep for sealer. Don't hit the door over there. All right, we've got the K5 all masked up, but believe it or not, she's still not ready for paint. We've got a little more prep to do. The next thing we're gonna do here is degrease it, and let me show you why. This right here, that's LT's greasy fingerprints. He's always trying to mess me up here. But believe it or not, if we were to paint over that, say 5 or 6 months down the road, that's gonna bubble up on us. So we need to make sure we get that cleaned off. We can wipe down the rest of the body, followed by blowing it off with an air blower. Then I always like to tack the parts off. A tack rag is very sticky, so anything that's left behind on the panel, like dirt or lint, it will pick it up. Now, when it comes to painting a vehicle, there are a ton of products you need, and it can be very confusing what works well with each other, whether you're using a urethane, an enamel, or a lacquer. But that's why you want to use a dedicated automotive paint supply store like Single Source. They'll walk you through everything you need and help you to understand the products you're using. So they sent us over a gallon of epoxy sealer, our Protronic Blue base coat, and that looks really cool, reducer, and a setup of clear. This epoxy sealer mixes 2-to-1 with an activator, then a half part of reducer, and it's ready to spray. Okay, the first thing we need to talk about before we lay down any sealer is gun setup. Now, I've shown you this a little bit before, but today I'm going to show you my go-to every single time I walk in the booth. The first thing I want to do is pull the trigger wide open. Then I'm going to turn the fluid knob until I feel pressure on the trigger. Then that's set. It is good to go. Then with the fan control, most people spray with it all the way open. I like to dial it back in one turn, and that's set. And then as far as air pressure goes, I like to set this gun at about 18.5 at the inlet of the gun, and it is good to go. And that's exactly what we're looking for. All we need is one coat of sealer. A sealer is a great ground coat before base. It gives you a consistent finish. And not only that, if you have a few scratches left behind, this will help to fill them in. And this is a very important step, especially before laying down a metallic base coat. We can let this flash for about 20 minutes. The base we plan to lay down is called Protronic Blue. This color comes from a BMW off of the i8 Hybrid. If you have ever seen that car in this color, it is unbelievable how awesome it looks in the sun. And this mixes 1-to-1 with reducer. Any of you out there that have ever sprayed a heavy metallic like we have mixed up in the gun, you know how hard it can be to get the metallic to lay down evenly. And if you've never sprayed a metallic before, I'm here to tell you, you're gonna run into this. It's called modeling. This is when you spray the base, but the metallic in the base coat gathers or bunches together in areas, giving it a blotchy look. This is certainly not what you want. Another problem that can occur is called tiger striping. This is where the metallic basically moves to the center of your pass, making each pass uneven and transparent in between the passes, which causes the stripes. Typically, modeling is caused from your base coat going down too wet, and tiger stripes are caused because your fan pattern is a little too tight. Now, there are a couple of ways you can get around modeling. If you want to keep the same gun setup I showed you before, you just need to move down the panel a little quicker. But what I like to do is dial in the gun just a little bit more. I like to turn the fluid knob one full turn in. This is going to allow me to keep the same fundamentals that I always use, but less material is going to go down on the panel and hopefully give us a nice, even coat. If you have a color that you can't get to lay out even, there is one trick you can try, but I don't use this unless it's a must. You can pull the gun about 15 inches from the panel and apply a very quick pass. This is called a dust coat. When I'm spraying base, especially a metallic, I like to start at the bottom of the rockers and work my way up. Then across the roof and back down the other side. This is keeping what is called a wet edge. As opposed to starting in the center of the panel, working down, then going back to the center to work the other direction. This allows the paint to dry before you get back to it. And all we need is 3 coats. Well, there she sits. We've got 3 coats of base laid down on our K5, and she's looking really cool. But I'll be honest with you, that color wasn't the easiest in the world to lay down, but after a little bit of effort, we made it happen, and it looks really nice. So the next thing for us to do is mix up a little bit of clear, and we'll lay down a few coats on the Blazer. Then I've got some parts sitting over in the prep booth that are gonna go in as soon as we get finished up here. The clear mixes 4-to-1-to-1 with activator and reducer. And I'll use the same wet edge technique for clear as I did base. The only difference is this time I'm using a polyurethane clear as opposed to a urethane clear, like you've seen me use in the past. Polyurethane actually is a little softer than urethane clear, but in the end, it makes it more durable. It's less prone to rock chips and it's more flexible, which is perfect for our off-road rig. I'm laying down 3 wet coats with about a 20-minute flash time in between. After letting the K5 sit overnight, we can get it out of the booth and take a look at this Protronic Blue finish. Yep. Well, man, what do you think about it?
You know, I'm digging the color, and I think this is a great representation of what teamwork can do. You know, we put our heads together and look at the beautiful result that we get.
You realize you didn't do anything, right?
Yeah, but it still looks great.
Well, hey, I'm glad you like it. It turned out pretty good, but I've still got quite a bit more
you
to
know
do.
what?
So.
I'll help you out. I'll spray those parts if you want.
I think I might let you do it.
All right.
Just so you can see how much fun it is.
Let's get him in the booth.
We will start by hanging the doors. Then we'll bring the hood in and put it on a stand. We can hang both fenders using our rods we fabbed up to hang parts in the booth. And you know the drill, another wipe down with wax and grease remover. The next step is to back mask the hood to keep overspray from getting on the bottom side. Believe it or not, I see a lot of guys run into color match issues when they're spraying a truck apart like we are here. But that's why I've hung the parts like you see them. The doors are hanging up just like they would sit on the truck, along with the fenders and the hood. Believe it or not, if we took those doors and we laid them flat, we sprayed our base, the metallic would lay differently on the panel than it did on the body. Therefore, it could make that door look like it's a different color, and well, you wouldn't be happy with that. So this is a very important step to hang the parts like this. Another thing is you want to take a mental note of how you set your gun up when you sprayed the body and all the fundamentals you used. I'll start by laying 1 coat of sealer down on the parts. Usually this is all you need, but you can lay down 2 coats if you need better coverage. Now, mixing the base coat is pretty standard like we always do, but it's actually really neat to see the reducer go into the blue base. The metallic gets suspended in the solvent and actually starts dancing around, and it creates a really cool effect. Of course, all of that metallic and aluminum particles lay down perfectly when they go on the panel. All we need is 3 coats, using all the same techniques I used when I sprayed the body. Now we can mix up the clear and lay down 3 wet coats, and our parts are done.
Dude, you've been in here all day. Is this not done yet?
Where have you been all day?
I had to go get parts and lunch, and it's 90 degrees outside. It's been a rough one.
You sound, yeah, real busy. Well, just so you know, I've got the cab in color, I've got the parts in color, so for the most part, everything's painted.
Well, that's not.
Well, I'm gonna do something a little different. I'm gonna put a bedliner in here. And since we're gonna off-road it, we're gonna get it muddy and all that stuff.
Hold up. Last time we went off-roading, we did a frame-off restoration, so I don't know that you want to do that again.
We'll take it easy off-road this time, but I'm also gonna bedline the cab instead of doing a carpet. That way we can just rinse it out when we get it
Will
dirty.
the bedliner protect it from trees?
No, so take it easy on it. Where are you going?
I got stuff to do, man.
I'm gonna get him this time. All right, with the K5 in the booth and the inside of the bed and cab sanded in 180 grit paper, we're ready to lay down this Raptor liner kit that Single Source in Nashville, Tennessee sent us. Now what's really cool about this kit is it's actually tintable. So instead of laying down a black bed liner, we'll get to lay down a Protronic Blue. We'll get a really cool texture so it'll look nice, but get really cool protection as well. Let me show you how it works. We'll start by mixing 250 milliliters of activator and thoroughly shake up the bottle. I'll top off the bottle using our blue base coat and then shake it up again. What's convenient about this product is everything happens within the bottle. I'll start by doing a test on the wall and setting my pressure to 60 psi, and we're ready to go. Inside the cab, I'll start with the gun about 12 inches from the panel, making nice even passes until I have it covered. I'm just going over a few things with him and the techniques I use.
Makes sense. Okay. I think he's got it.
Then he can go to town. Our K5 had been on the back burner for quite some time, but in the past little bit, we've made a ton of progress on it. We've got everything painted and we've got a color match bedliner in there. She's looking really cool, but today we're gonna spend a little bit of time with our powertrain.
Some time ago, we installed a 454 big block Chevy, and to it, we attached a Procharger D1. Now, we have a horsepower goal of somewhere around 550 to 600 horse. Today, we need to build an exhaust, and most off-the-shelf systems that you'll get are only 2.5 inches, and that's just not going to cut it for the amount of horsepower that we want to push.
So I guess that means today we're gonna do a little fab work.
All this week, we are fortunate to have MagnaFlow's master builder, Richard Wadis, next door in Engine Power. He created a custom exhaust for Mike and Pat's triple threat Camaro. And because of the aftermarket chassis, Richard utilized a MagnaFlow 3-inch builder's kit to get the job done. I mentioned to him our K5 project, and he said he'd save some time for us as well. Well, Richard, here's the Blazer. What do you think?
A lot more room.
Yeah, we figured this would be a little easier to work on.
Yeah, I mean, she's got about 4 inches of lift on it, 35s, you know, the thing's sitting way up in the air. Basically, we've got the headers in place. Probably muffler somewhere back here. We want to do something a little bit different and run a single tailpipe, actually.
Right. Well, the wide pipe configuration is good. In a lot of cases, too, it helps with just the balance. You know, if you're not going to put an X or a true dual and with an H pipe or something, helps with power, but also gives it a nice, clean sound. And for packaging's sake, while we are gifted with a lot of space down here, we're running big tubing. So the less bending we have to do, the cleaner it's going to look. And ultimately, since we are using manual bends, we're not too worried about the bending. But again, it's all exposed. We've got so much lift on this that you're going to see everything on the underbody. We want it to look as good as it's going to perform.
All right, well, we'll leave that all up to you. Let's go check out some parts.
Ooh, let's go. Man, you brought a lot of goodies.
Yeah, well, you guys kind of gave me an idea of what you were looking for and how to get you something that was bigger than the traditional 2.5-inch exhaust and dual setups that go in here, because you are running between, what, 550, 600 horse, you said?
Yeah, really, that's the goal we're shooting for.
Gotcha. So with that going into dual tube, we want to start with about a dual 3-inch, and then being that you also said you wanted to go into a single tailpipe, we need something that could support that as well, so we have a 4-inch for the tailpipe.
Gotcha. Now, you know, talking about horsepower and diameters, with the dual 3-inch head pipes, what in theory could that support, you know, if we wanted to, you know, make a smaller pulley on the Charger and boost it up just a little more?
Well, definitely the 3-inch is going to get you to at that 500, 550 mark with a zero loss type of situation. But if you're really looking at wicking it up and pushing that even harder, you might be better off to go like a 3.5 if you really need that last bit of power. But realistically speaking, with obviously the type of truck we're working with and the 1/10 of a second not really being what you're aiming for, you're going to have overall a better drivable mid-range as well as a sounding vehicle, I think, and in a smaller diameter tube size.
All right, great.
Yeah, well, there's one thing I noticed. Now, I'm a guy that I like to make things look good, and LT, he likes to make things go fast. I get it, but I don't think I want to run the tip. What do you think about that?
Well, it's a tough decision, but at the end of the day, I might be on your side in this just because if there isn't a purpose for it, I think the exhaust system is supposed to accent the rest of the vehicle.
There you go.
But if it's a primary feature and it doesn't have a place to be, sometimes, you know, better heard and not seen when it comes to exhaust.
You're a good man.
Well, I guess the no's have it, but we'll let you get to it.
All right.
We're back on Truck Tech, where Richard from MagnaFlow is creating a custom exhaust for our full-size Blazer. When he's not manning the TIG or chop saw, he's rubbing shoulders with the likes of Mario Andretti, Richard Petty, and Chip Foose, while coordinating MagnaFlow's marketing strategies and their huge presence at the SEMA show.
You know, I've been doing this about 15 years, and I still say I enjoy this the most. It's the part of getting out underneath the vehicles, working. There's a lot of what I do in the industry that's sitting behind a desk or just talking to some of the people, but this is where you kind of keep your skills honed, and it's actually a good release, something you can do physically and see what's in your head actually come out to reality. So as I'm assembling the exhaust system, you're going to see that I install a part and I remove it several times. Part of that process is to make sure that each piece and segment as it's lined up continues to line up as you get from front to back. One of the things you'll note as well, you could probably assemble the entire system just tack welding it, but one of the downfalls of that is if you ever remove the pipe and hit something on the way down, God forbid you drop it, you may end up undoing all the work. So you'll see most of the time I take this back to the bench and seam weld each part to make sure that it's just not going to move. Every exhaust system poses its own obstacles, some being easier, some being more complicated. The trucks in general typically give us a lot of space in an H-frame, so it's obviously a breath of fresh air to come out and actually run a system that can aesthetically be just as pleasing to admire, not just functional about where the path of least resistance is to get the pipes from beginning to end. All right, so now we have the muffler fitted to the pipes, and as you can see, the pipe profile was made so that we didn't have any clearance issues around anything that moved, but more or less anything that was sensitive to heat. So now to the tailpipe. So while a 4-inch tailpipe seems a little bit odd in most applications, here we are working with the Supercharged V8, and on top of that, we're feeding a dual 3-inch system into it. So to accommodate the proper air volume to make that engine breathe correctly, while 4-inch looks big, it's absolutely the right choice for this truck. All right, well, that puts us in the home stretch. We've got through the tailpipe, now just on the truck.
All right, Richard, thank you so much for coming out and helping us out. This is definitely a beautiful exhaust.
It's a pleasure, as always, coming out here and getting to see all these cool projects you guys work on.
Well, I really like how you started at the headers, kind of went up and over the cross member. That's a little bit different, but it looks really clean and sanitary. And then just the single tailpipe on a Blazer like this, it just sets the truck apart from the crowd and has a really distinctive look to it.
Well, I can't wait till you get her fired up, so you're going to have to send me a sound clip or something and let me hear it from home.
Yeah, I've got a little bit more work to do as far as wiring and stuff, but I'll definitely do that.
Great.
Now, we've made a lot of headway on our Blazer recently, but today we're going to see if we can take that a step further. We're going to hang a few parts on here and see if we can make this thing look like a truck. One thing we want to do is protect all of our fresh paint. So, along the rocker and bedside, I'm laying down 1.5-inch tape. Tape is cheap, so it's safe insurance. Hey, LT, help me grab this door.
I still can't believe you broke my paintbrush. The guy at the hardware store told me that would lay down paint smoother than a spray gun.
Was he talking about houses, maybe?
Cabinets.
I'm not sure he was talking about on a K5 Blazer.
Man, don't knock it till you try it.
We can start by mounting the passenger door. 6 bolts hold it in place. And we'll start by putting the door in the center of its adjustment. Do a quick test to check the gaps, and our door is good to go. Next, the core support has to go on before the fender can be mounted. Grab that side for me if you would.
All right, mine's in. Yours in yet?
The washer goes over the bushing, followed by the nut, and we can snug it down. Now we can set the passenger fender in place. Hey,
what?
I'll take all the painted in here.
Good idea. Hey, I can always touch it up. I have a really good paintbrush.
Line it up,
You can go back
and a few bolts secure it.
right there.
All right, so we've got the door and the fender hung on the passenger side, and everything's looking really good. Now, you'll remember when we painted this Blazer, I showed you how to paint all the panels apart, but still make a metallic paint job match. And check this out. It matches 100%. You would never know this truck was painted apart. Now, another thing you'll remember is a while back, we hung all of the panels, gapped it out, did all of our metal work and all of our body work. Now, the reason we did that is because we don't want to take a chance to scratch any of this nice blue paint. Only took a few minutes to hang the parts back together. We've got perfect gaps.
Got the balance of it.
On the driver door, the same steps apply. We're starting with the door in the center of its adjustment, but after a quick test, tilt the top out. It's a bit tight at the A-pillar, so we can loosen up the bolts, make the necessary adjustments, and then it's right on the money. Now we can mount the driver fender to finish up this side of the truck.
We have the whole front end of the truck assembled, but we left out the inner fender wells and the hood because we have a lot of plumbing and electrical work to do later on, and that stuff would just get in our way. But since the core support is on the truck, we can work on the cooling system. Originally, our Blazer was equipped with a small block and a tiny radiator. Now, we have a supercharged big block, and it's going to be making a lot more heat than the stock radiator could safely pull out of the engine. So we needed to upgrade, and we went to Brothers Trucks. This is their 4-row aluminum radiator. Now, it's hand welded and made from aircraft quality aluminum. And the nice thing about a 100% seam welded radiator is there's no epoxy that could dry up and cause leaks down the road. Plus, this one has a built-in automatic transmission cooler to help keep that 4L80 running strong. We also grabbed their electric fan shroud kit. It comes with two 14-inch fans that'll flow a total of 2,400 CFM of air. And it comes with a wiring kit that'll make everything work and come on at the right temperature. And it has an aluminum shroud that'll bolt right onto their radiator, safely mounting up the fans.
We're making really good progress on our Blazer. We've got both doors and both fenders on the truck and aligned. LT's up front working on the cooling system and buttoning up some things under the hood. So the next thing for us is to tackle some of this interior. Now, if you remember, the inside of this '89 K5 Blazer was quite dated. Not only was it old, worn out, and dirty, the faded blue wouldn't really go along with our new paint job and the scheme of our truck now. Plus, those nasty seats were like sitting on your grandmother's old couch. So we went over to Brothers Trucks and picked up a few new parts. We grabbed everything from seat belts for bucket seats, sun visors with hardware, armrest pads, a dash pad, and door panels, all black in color. Now, this will break up a lot of that blue we've got going on, but also go along with some of those black accents, like our powder-coated frame, black valve covers, and radiator support. Now, we also picked up a new set of analog-style gauges. Now, these feature a tachometer, a speedo, and all the gauges we need to keep a close eye on all of our engine's vitals. Now, remember, we want to go simple with the interior in this truck, so we're not going to run any carpet. Although Brothers does offer a huge variety for this truck, but we want to be able to just wash out the mud. So we're going to get started by installing the gauges. A few screws secure our new gauges into the dash. Then I transferred the mounting clips, vents, and trim from the old dash pad onto the new one, and we can put it into place and pop it in. Followed by installing the original gauge cluster. Now, we didn't put in a new one because we want to do something to keep a little bit of that 90s nostalgia. So we're installing the billet cover that was on the Blazer when we purchased it.
Well, there you go. That really gives you a good idea of how the black and blue interior is going to look. I think it's looking great. Now, obviously, we have to put the vent windows in and the door glass and the mechanisms and all that. And when we wire the truck, we're going to have to take care of those gauges as well. But we are well on our way to making this Blazer great again.
We tossed the original seats that were in the K5 in the dump, and we plan to install new bucket seats starting with the brackets. I'll center up the bracket on the floor and then mark the 4 holes. Using a step bit, I can drill them out to accept the 1/2-inch bolts. The seats we plan to run in our K5 are these Corbeau Baja JP suspension seats we got from Summit Racing. Now, these are great for off-road rigs like ours because they take all of the abuse out on the trail instead of your body taking it. Now, the reason for this is the military suspension cords on the bottom of the seat, as opposed to the old spring style that we all know aren't that comfortable. Now, these are built with heavy-duty steel frames, and they already come with cutouts in case you plan to run a harness. Now, we chose the black vinyl with black cloth inserts to match everything else. I can start by bolting the brackets to the bottom of the seat. And then we can move over to the truck and bolt our new seats into place. Now, this is a vast improvement and certainly changes the looks in our Blazer.
The first thing to do on the radiator is to attach the fans to the shroud. While the fans alone move plenty of air, the shroud's job is to allow the fans to pull from the entire surface area of the radiator, rather than just a circular area behind the fan, making cooling much more efficient. With the fans attached, the shroud fits tightly over the radiator and gets screwed to the top and bottom, holding it in place. Then the rubber isolators go down, and the whole package drops into the core support, and the factory clamps hold it in place. And since our transmission is a non-lockup unit with a high stall speed, we're using an oversized Earl's 34-row oil cooler to pull heat away from the trans, keeping the fluid at a comfortable temperature.
We finally got our Blazer back in here, and there's no doubt we've got her looking really good, but there's a lot of work left to do. If there's one thing I know about you, you don't like block sand.
You are correct.
And if you know a little bit about me, I don't really like working on diesel pickups.
I think you do, you just don't like to admit it, but okay.
But there's one thing I think we both have in common.
Okay, let me hear it.
We don't like to wire.
You know, I remember back when we were tearing this Blazer apart, I said to myself, because you remember we were sitting underneath the dashboard, we were pulling a bunch of stuff out.
Yep.
And I said, I feel bad for the guy that has to put this all back in.
Yeah, I'm not doing that.
And this is only half of it.
I know, that's bad.
I thought you might say that, so I called in some backup.
You're a good man.
Guys, meet the man who's going to bail us out, Scott Bowers with Ron Francis Wiring.
What's going on, guys?
Man, I'm happy to see you.
So, like we talked about a little bit earlier on the phone, we've got an '89 K5 Blazer, and as far as square bodies go, it's kind of a special year because it had fuel injection, cruise control, and a whole lot of other electronic stuff, and we really aren't going to use much of it.
Yeah, the trick is if you start trying to use that factory harness and you're taking those items off, you have a lot of extra wires you don't know what to do with. That's where we come in.
Yeah.
So we got one of our express wiring kits that's going to wire up all the circuits that you're going to keep. I hear you got, a couple accessories, electric fans.
Yeah, we really wanted to simplify things, so just a carburetor, electric fuel pump, electric fans, obviously the lights and everything, but it's going to be pretty straightforward and simple, and just like you said with the factory harness, when you look at that thing, it's nasty, it's 30 years old. If you tore it down, cleaned it up, you've got the brittle ends, you've got wires that could be, shorted out or broken, so why not replace it all? Something that good, especially.
Exactly, nice wiring in a nice truck. How about that?
Absolutely.
So first thing we need to do is mount the fuse panel. Can we get that going?
Yeah, I got a good place for that.
Great.
We're mounting the fuse block underneath the dash in the same spot as the original. It gets secured with 4 number 10 screws and nylock nuts. All right. We're also installing a junction block on the firewall in the same location as the original.
This is going to be one of the major power feed circuits. So we'd like to solder this to make the best connection it can be. In doing so, we're going to solder it, but there is some tricks to soldering. You don't want to use so much solder that it gets wicked up in the wire and it ends up making the wire brittle because it's stiff and it won't flex any longer. So we're going to put just enough solder in there to seal up the barrel of the ring terminal, but no more that would allow the solder to be soaked up into the wire itself. That was a little tip for you doing this at home. You don't want to use a lot of solder, so this is one of those cases where more isn't better. With the parts the guys have installed in the K5 Blazer, we're going to have 3 major groups of wires. We start with the engine group, which will include wiring for things like the alternator, distributor, starter, and gauges.
There are a few sensors I'll have to install into the engine and trans. A temperature switch for our cooling fans, a temp sending unit for the cluster, and a vehicle speed sensor for our speedometer. With all the wiring connected onto the engine, we'll pass the first group of wires through a grommet and into the cab, where we'll connect them later on. Well, everything's more or less through. We're back on Truck Tech, where Scott from Ron Francis Wiring is helping get our K5 electrified. We have most of the wires for the front and rear section passed through the firewall, and the next job is to sort them for front and rear sections.
I like using electrical tape sparingly. It's more of a organization process for me, and then getting into wire coverings to fully protect them and dress them down real nice. After the engine side, the second major branch of wiring runs up front and includes things like the cooling fan and the horn, as well as headlights, running lights, and turn signals. It's very important to use the right connector system for the job. In the front of the vehicle, where it gets wet near the headlights, we're going to use a connector system that's sealed from the elements. So this is a typical weather pack connector system. It has both a seal that goes on the wire to seal the wire portion, plus a gasket to seal the two halves of the connector. Let me show you how they go together. First step is to put the grommet on. Next, we put the terminal on. And then insert it in the connector. Complete the process for all pins in the connector. Fold down the secondary lock, and you're done.
All right, thanks, man. Yep. Now, if you guys remember on these 89 Blazers, the headlights were actually side by side. We did a little front end conversion on this and swapped it over to a mid-80 style, so we have the stacked headlights. Thought that'd look a little better on our Blazer. Now up top, we've got the low beams, which is a 3-prong plug, and down low, we've got the high beams, which is a 2-prong.
The last major group of wires goes towards the rear of the truck. You get it? We'll be including circuits for the electric fuel pump, gas tank sending unit, of course the rear tail lights, and wiring for the power windows in the Blazer's tailgate.
Once the wires are all pulled to the rear, I'll split the harness between the driver's side and the passenger side, and then wrap the harness. When wiring a truck like this, I always plan ahead and think about servicing it later on. Small things like adding a plug at the taillight makes for real easy bulb changes whenever the time comes.
The finishing touch on the rear are some new tail lights we picked up from LMC Truck.
The final step is making connections at the fuse panel. We'll trim the wires to length, strip the end of the wire, crimp on a connector, and attach it to its home on the panel. Our system makes it real easy because every wire is labeled, so it's just simple as wiring by number. All right, guys, so do we have headlights?
All 4 of them.
Yeah, man, looks good.
Sweet.
Well, I guess we've got everything most wired up, so we're making more progress every day.
You know, I'll tell you this. This was the easiest harness that I've had to install so far.
You really want to take credit for this, don't you?
You know, I do it to him all the time, so absolutely.
Well, my pleasure. I'm just happy to help.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, for knocking this out. You know,
Thanks, man.
it's a big help for us, certainly.
Appreciate it a
No
bunch.
worries. Good luck with the project.
Thank you.
So, would you drive this if it were yours?
Absolutely. I'm such a big fan of Superchargers.
This thing's
wrong.
awesome.
When it comes to final assembly of your restoration project, it's usually just a matter of bolting stuff back together because all the engineering and design work has already been done. There are a few times when people love to call in the experts, though. Wiring is definitely one of them, but the other is usually auto glass. When it comes to putting in windshields, that's one thing people love to have a little bit of help on. Now, on a lot of modern vehicles, the windshield is actually glued to the body, making it part of the structure of the vehicle. The surface is first prepared with a pinch weld primer, which helps improve adhesion. Then a special high-strength urethane adhesive is applied, and the windshield is set into place and taped while the glue cures. It can be a bit tricky to glue a windshield onto the body of a vehicle, but on a lot of older vehicles, the windshield's actually held in place with a rubber gasket, and that's something that you can easily install with just the help of a friend. On the 67 to 72 Chevy trucks, the windshield uses a rope-in style gasket. You have to start by laying the windshield down and sliding the gasket over the edge of the glass all the way around the perimeter. Then you take a small rope and lay it in the pinch weld groove with the long ends overlapping at the bottom. Then you set the windshield onto the body of the truck, and by pulling the rope, the rubber gasket is pulled over the pinch weld, locking the windshield into place and creating a leak-proof seal. On the 73 to 87 Chevy trucks and Blazers and Suburbans until 91, the windshield, it still actually attaches to the body using a rubber gasket, but it goes on just a little bit differently, and all you need are a few inexpensive tools to get the job done. The first is some way to install the locking strip into the gasket. Now you can buy a dedicated tool or just have a pick with a blunt nose on it. Then you need just a couple of soft plastic windshield tools and then a little bit of soap and water.
Well, LT, there's one more piece of the puzzle you're going to need.
I suppose a windshield probably would help. Guys, Jeremy from XOR. So what's the story? Where'd you find this?
Well, there was a box, or an LMC box, sitting out in front of our studio, and it had Jeremy written on it, and I guess I never looked in it. Well, I opened it up today, and I found that it's the glass for your guys' K5.
You weren't hiding that from me, were you?
No, I was trying not to.
Well, since you brought it down, I guess that means you're going to give me a hand putting it in.
If it takes a couple of minutes, let's see what happens.
Tell you what, get this thing unwrapped. I'll get the gasket on.
All right, let's see.
All it takes is a little pressure, and the gasket should slide right over the pinch weld. It gets lubed up with a little soap and water. All right, if it breaks, it's on you. And the glass can be set in, starting at the bottom. All right, so first thing, just kind of get the bottom sort of set in the groove there. There we go. Using the plastic tool, we'll work the windshield into the gasket.
Come on.
Okay.
And secure it in place with a locking strip. Well, what do you say? You want to help me do the side glass?
I don't think so. I think I'm gonna go work on something a little bit bigger than the Blazer.
Good luck, man. You know what they say about big trucks?
What's that?
Look at who showed up.
Well, I wouldn't miss the opportunity to take our 89 square body out onto some dirt. And I'm here to tell you, I'm happy with the way she turned out.
Well, hold up. Dirt? What about rocks and trees and mud and ditches and all that good stuff?
Dude, have you seen this truck? Have you seen how nice it is? Or remember how much time I put into that paint job?
You're right. There are a lot of hours in this truck. So here's a quick look back at how we got it looking as good as it does today.
Lay in it, go. Before we started working on this 1989 K5 Blazer, we hit the trail just to see how a 30-year-old stock truck would perform on some challenging terrain. And let me tell you, we had a blast.
Whoa! Now surely you could see that tree, right? Our plan was to design something that looked great and was a heck of a lot of fun to drive. And we also knew there were many different ways we could make this happen. We decided to jump in and go all out. So, first thing we did was bring it into the shop and immediately tear it down. We removed the front sheet metal, the engine and trans, stripped out the whole interior. Every last part of this truck was disassembled, and we were left with a big pile of parts.
And if you're going to take on a project this size, it's always a good idea to see what the last guy left you under the original paint. So the first order of business was to get the truck stripped down to bare metal so we could get to the few rough spots that needed to be addressed. Once back to the shop, we immediately applied a coat of epoxy primer that would prevent any flash rust. Lucky for us, there were only a few small spots that needed to be addressed. We cut out the rot, formed up some new patches, welded them in, and metal finished it out.
At this point, we were fully committed, so next up was to tackle the frame. We began assembly with a 4-inch lift kit and some Fox shocks. A bulletproof 14-bolt full floater rear axle was sourced from a local junkyard. Out front, we converted the original 10-bolt to a matching 8-lug bolt pattern using Dana 44 parts. We ditched the TBI 350 for a stout 454 HO crate engine and backed it up with a 4L80 automatic trans. And since we really wanted to push the power over the top, a little while later we added a Procharger D1 SC Supercharger, which will pump about 6 pounds of boost into that big block, making a fun ride which will get down the street, track, or trail in a hurry.
As always, we hung and pre-gapped the sheet metal, then sprayed the entire truck with BMW Protronic Blue. And I'm telling you, this color is hard to lay down. It's loaded with pearls and metallics, so if not done right, it could look blotchy or uneven. But this came out looking like $1 million. So we had a rendering drawn up, which is what we wanted the truck to look like. What do you think? Pretty close, huh?
I'd say we pretty well nailed it. And from that point on, it was just a simple matter of reassembling the sheet metal to make it look like a truck again. For the interior, we chose a minimalist approach. Off-road suspension seats and a few basic trim panels do the trick. Richard from MagnumFlow came in and built us a custom 2-into-1 exhaust. And to simplify the electrical, we got rid of all the factory wiring and replaced it with just the basics with some parts from Ron Francis.
To get power from the transfer case to both axles, we hit up Tom Wood's Custom Drive Shafts. They sent us a slip yoke eliminator kit with a double carbon shaft for the rear, which will allow more wheel travel and smoother operation.
To top off the big block, we installed a Demon 850 CFM blow-through carburetor. We didn't show you guys the final reassembly of the Blazer, because let's face it, it's just a bunch of small, boring parts. Window seals, regulators, and a bunch of other odds and ends.
But I can show you how we got this charcoal textured finish on our topper. First, we roughed up the surface with 80 grit on a D8, then backmasked to protect the underside. Our tenable Raptor liner mixes with activator as well as our color, which is a charcoal we picked called Modern Steel. But now she's fully bolted together and ready to rock. We have a beautiful and stylish looking Blazer that would be at home sitting at a car show, driving on some back roads, tearing it up on the track, or just daily driving it.
The K5 looks pretty classy sitting under the lights in the shop, but we actually built it to be a fairly capable off-road machine as well.
So coming up next, we're gonna get this K5 out of the shop and into the woods and see what kind of trouble we can get into.
Finally, the classy K5's day has arrived. We plan on putting our Virgin Blazer back where it belongs, in the woods, in the water, and in the mud.
We're at Woolley's Off-Road Park in Linville, Tennessee. It's 600 acres of some of the most beautiful but challenging terrain, with trails from mild to wild. Good day to go wheeling. Our expectations weren't very high for our K5 when we came here almost 15 months ago, but now we've got more power, better suspension, and bigger axles. Today, plan to have a lot more fun. Where are the running boards?
The what?
The running boards, so I can get in.
I got a step ladder in the back. All right, man, here's a little bit of mud. Kind of the first taste. Ease into it real gentle. Throttle out.
Yeah, I didn't think we'd have any problems.
Dang!
That's a lot of fun.
Yeah! Oh, it's taking every bit of it, too.
Oh, big jump.
Yeah. Oh,
I think we may have come off the ground that time. See, we probably would have been lucky to make that hill before.
I tell you, I am a little bit worried about that 10-bolt front axle and all this torque that we're putting through it. But we'll see what happens. Even though this is a full-size rig, you know, these trails are pretty tight. It's really the short wheelbase is what makes the best wheeling rigs.
Yeah, that's what I like about the K5s. If I had to pick anyone personally for myself, I think it would be a K5 for that fact.
I'm staying clear of the rocks to preserve Jeremy's precious paint job. He can go there if he wants to. I'm more interested in seeing how our newest project does off the highway. All right, little red truck, see what you got. I will say that the independent front suspension on this certainly rides a bit smoother than the K5's solid axle. We are going to keep the IFS intact, but just about every other part of this drivetrain will be upgraded, and you might be surprised at what we have planned. All right, man, so it's the end of the day. We got a big giant mud hole here and a high-power four-wheel drive truck. So what do you say?
I say we hit it, man. This is the kind of stuff I like to do, so let's see if we can bury it up.
Well, we got another truck just in case we can't get this one out, so what's your strategy?
We may need that other truck, but I say we creep up to it. We'll just hold it to the floorboard and see if we get to the other end.
All you, man. Let's do it. Hey, man, if you bury this thing, I'm walking home. You're on your own.
You may not be able to get out of here and walk anywhere.
I got my swimming trunks. on, that was nothing. And now we're getting a little snippy. Woohoo!
Let's see what this one has for us.
Yeah.
That's not too bad. I think we ought to go through the middle.
I don't know, man.
Back the same way?
Yep. Oh, not that way. Come on, man, you better throttle out. Yeah. I think there's a little horse manure mixed in with that. Kind of got a little bit of an organic taste. We're going a little deeper this time. Everybody ready? Okay, so just so you know, this truck has no winch, no tow hooks, and the tow straps are in the other truck. So
you ready to push? Here we go.
Go for it. Oh man, better throttle it up. Get on it. Go. Better keep that foot down, buddy. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Keep on it. We're almost there. Yeah. Woo! Yes.
Yeah, this baby can do anything.
I love it.
Just so everybody knows, I can't see out of the windshield. You may have to direct me a little.
I can see. Straight. A little bit left. Yeah. Yeah. Keep it down, man. Keep it down.
He's buried. I'm putting a dent in the floor.
Oh, woo! Keep it down. Uh-oh. Keep going, keep going. Keep going. Woo! Keep it alive, keep it alive.
Come on, come on.
Come on. Oh, no.
Oh!
Come on. Yeah! Yeah! Woo! Keep it out! Keep it out! Oh,
Come on, truck! Come on, baby!
Put to the floor, man. It's flooded. Come on.
Come on, girl!
Yeah!
I can't see!
You're good! All right, we're out. Oh, right to the log. Woohoo! Yeah! Woo! Yeah! Woo! Man!
I'd say we found the deep spots in there. I think LT got a little wet.
Holy cow, man. You know what? The doors are shut, so I'm okay, but that was a knockout of the park,
That
man.
was awesome, man. I
You
love
can't
it.
get a better day than that. Holy cow.
Oh, golly, that was fun.
I got one problem, though.
What's that?
You got that car show coming up this weekend, and you got some cleaning to do.
I'm not cleaning this thing.
I'm driving the red truck home. Remember, you can check out PowerNationTV.com for anything seen on today's show. Someone we won't be seeing after today is my co-host, Jeremy Bumpus. After 3.5 seasons, he's moving on. Back to his custom hot rod shop he owns in North Mississippi.
I absolutely had a blast getting to host the Truck Tech Show for quite a while now. Met a ton of cool people. The main thing was I got to teach a lot of people, and that's what I was after. That was my main goal. I couldn't be more grateful for who I worked with and what I was able to do and accomplish through these years. And I had a ton of fun and sure gonna miss it.